Yep, ready to proceed.
Okay, well, good evening and welcome to Hackney's Planning Committee. The Council will be recording this meeting. Proceedings will also be live streamed on YouTube. Please bear in mind that your microphone and camera are on. You'll be heard and seen as part of the live stream. My name is Councillor Vincent Stopps. I should be chairing this evening's meeting. We're here remotely because the Chief Planning Officer at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government has asked that decisions be prioritised by the Planning Service and that we should adopt these sort of approaches to keep planning decisions, committee decisions going. We'll be sticking as close as we can to our normal way of doing things, albeit we're doing this remotely. The virtual technology has a chat function. Please only use it if you want to talk about IT. I'm not monitoring it. If it's misused, you'll eventually be removed from the meeting, so please don't misuse it. When your camera's turned on, as I've said, please ensure that you're visible to the YouTube. If you have to go out for any reason, and this doesn't include councillors, you can't go out, please put your camera off. Only one person may speak at a time. If you've registered to speak, turn your microphone on when you're asked to speak. If there's any disruption, then eventually you will be taken out of the meeting. Technology allows me to do that. In the event of an internet outage, the meeting will be adjourned and we'll try and recover from that. Hopefully we'll be able to carry on right through the whole meeting. We will have a break probably after the first item, and we're aiming to get finished by 3 hours, so by 9:30. Pretty sharp guillotine on that, unless we're just on the cusp of that time. I'd like to introduce the Head of Planning. Natalie is with us. Our Legal Advisor, Tom, is here, and Gareth, who some of you will have talked to from Governor's Services. There are more design, planning and transport officers here to advise us. I'll let members introduce themselves after I've spoken about the meeting. Before moving on to the agenda, I'll just describe how the meeting will proceed. We'll hear each application summarised, a 5-minute statement from the objectors and a 5-minute statement from the applicant. Members will then be free to ask questions. It's my role as chair to make sure members have all the information they need to make a decision, objectors and applicants have their say, and that the meeting runs properly. I see Peter Snell has arrived. Welcome, Peter. I'll not be taking any contribution from the floor, just the people who are in the room. And this is a public meeting, it's a meeting in public, not a public meeting. You must be given notice to the governance services that you wish to speak. As I've said, you have 5 minutes. Where there's more than one of you, you need to decide, and I hope you have, how you're going to divide that time up. Members are not representing either their wards nor their political parties. We make our decisions on the basis of the site visits we've made, what we've read in the reports, and of course what we hear this evening. We must only take account of policies adopted by this council, other material planning policies and material planning considerations. Members making the decision should not have allowed themselves to prejudge any application prior to the meeting. Similarly, if they have any interest in the application site or the people involved, they will declare that interest and may remove themselves from the decision. And if they do leave, then at the end we'll have to contact them and get them back. That'll be an interesting thing. Let's hope it doesn't have to happen, but if so, members need to keep in touch with us and we'll call you when we're ready. When we've finished our deliberations, we'll vote on the recommendation. I'll describe the voting procedure before we vote. And when we've made that decision, it's the end of the matter for the committee. The applicant may appeal our decision to the Secretary of State. Objectors may seek legal redress. I advise you to seek professional advice in either case. If I can now ask each member to introduce themselves and then confirm they can hear the proceedings, etc., and their microphones are working, and then we can record their presence. So we've got Katie.
Good evening.
Susan.
Good evening.
Brian, Councillor Bell.
Good evening.
Councillor Snell arrived a little late.
Good evening.
And Councillor Race hasn't arrived. He gave his apologies for lateness, didn't he? Okay, that's good. So we'll now move to the agenda. The business will be as set out. Apologies for absence. We've got a few. We've got Councillor Joseph, Councillor Levy and Councillor Potter have apologised.
That is correct, Chair.
Councillor Race, he's got a TRA meeting that he has to chair this evening, so he'll be late. Declarations of interest. I have no formal declarations of interest, just to let people know that we have received various lobbying material that's been passed on to the officers to have a look at. I've received stuff from both applicant and objectors. I think there was even a few tweets that I tried to send to officers. I hope they've seen them. Are there any other declarations of interest? No, 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 no. Okay. So the minutes.
Chair, just like yourself, I have received correspondence from the objectors.
Okay, thank you very much. So the minutes of the previous meeting, so we've got two sets of minutes. One was a meeting where we didn't have time to consider them, and I've emailed people around, and I think they're okay. Members will know what I'm talking about. Does anybody have any issues with those? No? Okay, Gareth, at some point I'll have to come in and actually sign these, won't I?
Yes. Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members.
So that's the 23rd of April minutes, and then the 3rd of June minutes. That was the Boris building meeting. I've had a look and I'm happy with those minutes. Are others happy with those minutes? Yes, thumbs up there from Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, committee members.
Again, we can clear those, and I'll make sure I come in and sign them. Just before we proceed, I will talk about the material that we have received, just to make a note that not everybody will have read all of that material. So just for officers, please do presume that you need to explain if there's any new issues in that material, because as I say, not everybody will have read all of it. There was quite a bit. And just a comment really on the suggestion made at full council that somehow this planning committee doesn't listen to objectors. I didn't have a chance to respond to that. Just to say that you'll see this evening, as in all of our meetings, the planning committee spends a good deal of its time considering objectors representations in full and to the nth degree to make sure that we're happy we've considered them. So just to reassure any objectors and indeed applicants this evening that suggestion is not really the case, as you will see. And of course the planning service has also spent a lot of time considering objectors and applicants' submissions. So without further ado, if we can go to Kingsland Road, and Stephen, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just bring up the presentation now.
You'd speak a little louder, Stephen.
Okay. Could everybody see the presentation okay?
Yes.
So item number 5, 305 Kingsland Road. This is the application site here on the west side of Kingsland Road. It's currently a Travis Perkins Builders Merchants, and the application is to demolish the existing buildings on the site and develop a Part 6, Part 7 story building, which comprises co-living and co-working floor space, which will be explained. It's described in the committee report in further detail. This is the front elevation of the site, so you can see this is the existing building here, the Travis Perkins building, and then it's adjoined by other more recent mixed-use developments which have taken place up and down Kingsland Road. Some views from the north looking south down Kingsland Road, and the application site is just in here within the Kingsland conservation area. And then looking northwards, and the site is sort of just in here. And the views of the rear of the site, which abuts the Kingsland Basin. This is the view from the Regent's Canal Bridge. So this is within, so the rear of the site faces onto the Regent's Canal Conservation Area. And then another view from the opposite side of the basin. So this is the rear of that existing building that fronts Kingsland Road. And then there's a sort of storage shed building at the rear of the site, and then adjoining developments at the side. And then again, as you can see, some of the other sort of developments which have taken place around the basin. And then this is the north side of the site. So this is Quebec Wharf, which is a Grade 2 listed building on the north side of the application site. And then you can see, this is the view from the adjoining, some of the flats at the adjoining building to the south. So that's the flank elevation of Quebec Wharf. And again, and with a bit more context and around. And again, and this is the frontage building fronting onto Kingsland Road. And then, so this is the view within the adjacent development to the south, which is Commercial Wharf, Canal Wharf. It's arranged around this sort of courtyard car parking area. That's the existing building on the site, the existing storage building that you can see that sort of comes up above this boundary wall here. And then this is the view looking eastward. So that's the application site building there, and the adjoining development against it. And again, you can see this is a view from some of the balconies within that building. You can see the existing building projects beyond the rear elevation of Commercial Wharf a small amount. And then this is a view from 301 Kingsland Road, which is to the south of that of Commercial Wharf. So that just sort of immediately on the boundary of Commercial Wharf there, these flats with deck access corridors. The application site itself comprises in a basement which contains a sort of light industrial type floor space, and it's got these sort of void cutout areas to allow daylight to penetrate down into this basement area, as well as the communal services for the building, bin storage and things like this. There's also a mezzanine level which has some light industrial and office type floor space and cycle storage. And then on the ground floor, this is predominantly more sort of office-based employment floor space. This is the frontage onto Kingsland Road. You've got a loading bay provided here to service the commercial floor space, and then a single entrance which serves all the commercial co-working space and also the co-living space. And then moving on to the first floor, there's office floor space here, and you can see the development kind of cuts away from the boundary to the south at this level. And then moving up to the second floor, this is the co-living space. So you've got the co-living rooms arranged fronting Kingsland Road, fronting the basin, and then this sort of central linking element here. The corridor, quite wide corridors that serve these spaces, and then you've got two kitchen dining rooms on either end here, and then this larger sort of mixed mode space for use by all the residents on this floor. And there's also a sort of breakout lounge area there. Moving on to the fifth floor, you can see the development begins to kind of cut away more as well from Quebec Wharf to the north here, So there's this sort of cutback here, as well as the cutback to the south. And then at the 6th floor level, the development steps away here. So these bits are now roof terraces, and then this is the main sort of bulk of the building that continues up to the 7th floor. And then on the roof, then you have at roof level a further roof terrace area here. And this shows it in section in a bit more detail, so you can see the co-working space within the lower levels and the co-living space above. And again, a long section this time through the site. So this is Kingsland Road, and that's the basin here. So you can see you've got the co-working space here in the basement, and then the co-living space above. This section just is a crossways looking eastwards, and so what this shows is the red dashed line is the heights of the existing buildings that are on the site. So this is the storage shed at the rear, which immediately abuts the boundary, and then this is the main building. So you can see this is the sort of proposed wall which is on the boundary of the site. So that's going to be the same height as the existing buildings that were there previously, and then the main sort of mass of the building fronting Kingsland Road does step up above the existing buildings here, but sort of similar scale to other buildings along Kingsland Road. These are just some CGIs to show how the internal sort of spaces will work within the building for the office and light industrial spaces, and then these plans show how the co-living space is arranged. So there's 121 private rooms. So each room has a sort of has bed space, a kind of small kitchenette, and also some living space within it as well. So this is unit type 1. So this is 24 square meters. And then proposed type 2, which is 19 square meters. Sort of a little bit smaller, but still with the same amenities. And then, so each of these, the residents of those private rooms also have access to these communal spaces. So there's a larger multi-mode space which could be used for a variety of sort of entertaining or leisure purposes. And there's also a kitchen dining space, generally 2 of those on each floor, and also a breakout sort of lounge area as well. And then at the roof terrace level, so there's kind of 3 roof terraces really. There's the top level roof terrace here. There's smaller terraces here at the 6th floor level. This one is intended for use by the commercial or the co-working space, and the others mainly for the co-living space. And you can see they're sort of accessible with landscaping and native species planting, and so on, to encourage biodiversity. So looking at the sort of space, so this is a relatively new sort of form of housing tenure. The co-living development. There are only 1 or 2 others that have been sort of developed in London. So this is a sort of table where you can. The intended market is really for single people who would be renting in the private rented housing market, and the product that's offered by the sort of co-living is to be specifically designed for shared living. And so it does have private space, less, each room is less than an equivalent studio flat or 1-bed flat, but then it also has access to the communal space as well to kind of make up for that. So this slide here shows a sort of comparison really. So, if you had, for instance, if you took a 3-bed flat or a 4-bed or 4-bed house, and that was let in a house share with 3 or 4 occupants. Each of those, they'd have their own room in the house, and then they'd have access to the shared rooms, the kitchen and living room, and so on. So that would equate to 20 to 25 square meters of space per person. Looking at this is the Old Oak Common comparison, which is listed in the committee report. Those rooms are typically 14 square meters, plus then with access to the communal space, so that brings it to around 20 square meters. Whereas this is the development itself. So as we saw, the rooms, the individual rooms are 19 to 24 square meters. The accessible rooms are larger than that, and then each occupier has access to around 5 square meters of communal internal floor space in those other rooms. So that would bring their total kind of space available per person to around 29 square meters, which would be in a greater amount of floor space than would be available in a sort of conventional house share. And also, in fact, if you looked at a housing on a per person basis as the minimum space standards in the nationally described space standard, it would also be favourable. For instance, if the standard for a 1-bed flat, 2-person 1-bed flat would be 50 square meters in the nationally described space standard, whereas so that would be 25 square meters per person. So this is proposing 29 square meters per person, which would be sort of in excess of that. Now onto the elevations. This is the Kingsland Road elevations. You've got a brick frame with these sort of recessed metal elements within the frame, and then there are small private external amenity spaces within for each of the units as well for some of those, and this colonnade feature at the ground floor level, which sort of ties in with the building line and the adjacent buildings. And then you can see views up Kingsland Road, the Kingsland Basin, and again from Kingsland Basin. This slide just shows the edge conditions with the basin. So the intention is that there'd be this planter strip along the edge of the basin to restrict access immediately up to the water, and also to support biodiversity. There have been a number of concerns raised about the impact of the development on biodiversity in the basin. It is a site of importance for nature conservation. The proposals would result in an increase in overshadowing of around 10% of the basin, but this would only be for sort of limited hours during the day, in a similar way to other developments the impact that they've had on the basin in terms of overshadowing as well. So if you look at this slide, so this is showing the existing situation at 7 AM. This is the proposed situation at 7 AM, the purple that is. And you can see similar at that point. Moving on to 8 o'clock, again, similar. So this is where mainly around where the additional overshadowing is occurring. At 9 AM, there would be increased overshadowing of the basin between on the spring equinox, 21st of March. So if you look at 10 AM here, in the existing 9 and 10, in the existing situation, there's no overshadowing of that space in the basin, but with the proposals there would be. But then as you move on to 11 AM, there's only a small area of overshadowing at that point, and then by 12 AM, no, the proposal's not going to have any additional shadowing impact on the basin itself. These are so I think the report does set out in further detail that there have been a number of sort of consultant reports submitted considering the ecological impact on the basin, and those do conclude that they would be that there wouldn't be any adverse impacts on the ecology, on fish ecology, and also bats. I'm sure you'll hear further from objectors who do have some concerns on that issue. In addition to the presentation, there is also a addendum report. So I will just go through the addendum report because it is quite lengthy. It may be worthwhile just sort of spending a bit of time on that. If you just a moment, I'll just bring that up. Can everyone see the addendum report? Okay. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. Okay. So first off, just there's a just there have been just that parking details. Just a correction. So there will be, we're looking to secure 2 spaces. They will need to be located off-site due to the constraints of the site on a red route and with a limited street frontage. Then there have been some additional comments received, raising concerns around the appropriateness of the development given the current COVID-19 situation, and there's an officer response there. Other comments have raised about how other co-living developments have been marketed as student or short stay accommodation, and again, that's been addressed in the addendum report and also in the committee report about the conditions that will be in place with this application to prevent use as short stay accommodation or by students, and also not a lot of concern around recent use of communal roof terraces and other nearby residential developments which have resulted in noise disturbance. We, again, there's an officer response there. We, in this case, we feel that the application proposals are quite a different nature to a conventional residential development, and that they will be a highly managed environment with a 24-hour on-site management, and so we can have. There will also be things like sort of CCTV surveillance of roof terraces and codes of conduct required for tenants and things like that. So we feel that those external amenity spaces will be highly managed, which will mean that antisocial behaviour will be, is much less likely to occur. The objectors did also ask that attention be drawn to a couple of reports that they had commissioned from an acoustic consultant who did consider that a further assessment of noise from the roof terrace should be undertaken. That is also addressed in the report by the officer view on that. And then there was a further daylight sunlight report that was being submitted by objectors who have highlighted the extent of the reductions to daylight, and also that the impacts will be worse if you assess the reductions in daylight without with the balconies of the neighbouring properties in place. I mean, officers are aware of this. It has been the daylight sunlight assessment that's been submitted by the applicant does assess the situation both with the balconies on and with the balconies off, and we know that there will be some significant adverse impacts on daylight. But as noted in the report, there are justifications for this in terms of the context of the surrounding area, and that the development is like, if any development on that site which is going to achieve a similar kind of scale and massing would result in some significant impacts on daylight. There's also 2 further comments, one from Councillor, written statement from Councillor Burke, and a written statement from Councillor Peters. So raising concerns about biodiversity, noise, the appropriateness of a co-living development, and again, these are all issues that are covered in the committee report. There are some further clarifications in the report at paragraph 6.1.13. This is where we're assessing the acceptability of co-living development. The first criteria says that there should be an identified need for co-living development and that it's not suitable for conventional residential development. There's just an additional clarification in here about what that, when the policy talks about need, this can be any type of need in terms of meeting housing, different types of housing need in the borough. It's not necessarily about affordability, and part 6 of the policy deals specifically with affordability, and that's also covered in the report. At paragraph 6.1.18, the applicants are proposing to increase the time, the restrictions on the short-term restrictions on rental tenancy agreements. So they're saying a minimum now, instead of a 3-month minimum, they're now proposing a 6-month minimum. This would, as I feel, this fits in more with the kind of type of premises that they're proposing to manage. So that would be much less of a short-term stay and more of a kind of longer-term accommodation. There's some further sort of typo, addressing some of the typos there, and then also there's some further conditions proposed around requiring an additional energy assessment addendum to set out the carbon reductions. Those are all sort of set out there in the addendum. Further, 8.1.20. This is the management plan condition. So this is the point. This is the point at which we secure the requirements for tenancy agreements not less than 6 months. So that's just the correction there from 3 to 6. Main residents only, no full-time students, and also an additional mention around CCTV of monitoring as well of the external terraces to prevent antisocial behaviour. And then at 8.1.22 and 8.1.23, the government's recently announced proposals to change the use classes order to introduce a new use class which allows the town centre use class, which incorporates B1 retail and some leisure type uses together into a single use class. So we're proposing a condition to prevent any sort of change of use away from business employment type use to other formerly kind of retail type uses in the current use class. And then a couple of just additions in terms of the legal agreement. That sort of concludes things really, Chair. Everything else is as set out in the report with recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got 3 speakers, Alex, Gideon and Esther. You've got 5 minutes between you, which I understand you've been talked to about. That's 1.5 minutes each, unless you're going to divvy it up some other way. So I will tell you when you've got to your 1.5 minutes, and hopefully you'll move on to the next person. So Alex, please.
So homeless in Hackney is double the English and London average. Just before Christmas, nearly 400 households were made homeless in the borough. And you'll probably know that first-time buyer house prices are now at £500,000 in the borough. This development is really costly and very expensive for people, not necessarily affordable at all for people in the borough. So it's high earners that are clearly well serviced in Hackney already, and it's low cost housing that is needed to improve the mix in the borough. You mentioned COVID. Inside Housing and Industry periodical in the Office for National Statistics have showed that higher housing density has contributed to the spread of COVID-19. This is a current problem, but it may happen again, and these are going to be issues that are going to come back to us. This is not a good housing option. If the committee members hope this is a viable option for residents longer term, rather than transient high-value tenants that this appears to be aimed at, the committee should consider the government's recent evaluation of permitted development conversions to residential, which was published last week. They result in housing units of very similar sizes and forced layouts, in fact, generally a little bit bigger. It shows that small units with limited natural light and communal facilities are likely to create worse quality and are widely linked to health and well-being and quality of life problems for future occupiers. These aspects are primarily related to the internal configuration as opposed to the exterior appearance, access to services, or broad neighbourhood location. This is only suitable accommodation for short-term tenants, not an additional to the housing stock. It's a cheap hotel, not what we need.
Thank you, Alex. Gideon, please.
The officer's report contains a number of errors. The proposal will be, number one, the proposal will be just rebuilding a temporarily lost frontage. This site has always been an unbuilt yard. Maps going back to 1870 prove it. Number two, the proposal would replicate the patterns of neighbourhood development. It clearly won't. This proposal would be double the density of neighbouring sites. The fiction that this proposal matches existing patterns is used to justify significant loss of daylight to neighbours. This density, combined with type of tenancy, would also lead to excessive noise pollution. LP 21 says the development must not have a detrimental impact on the amenity of neighbouring occupiers. To avoid evidence of loss of amenity, the applicant's noise assessment ignores communal space as a source of noise. Third error is detailed noise assessment of such spaces is not normally required, but it is. Policy says noise assessment should be carefully tailored to local circumstance and be fit for purpose. Fourth error, the justification for usage and design is unsound. Co-living and communal roof terrace examples provided by the applicant and officer are in very different contexts to Kingsland Basin. This proposal is out of context and high risk. Please test novel usage in less sensitive and unique sites. Planning policy says development by water will only be permitted if there is no conflict with nature conservation and if it enhances amenity value of the water space. Therefore, the committee should reject this proposal.
Thank you, Gideon. Esther, please.
The applicant's noise assessment ignores everyday noise from the 121 plus occupants. Adding acoustic screens to the communal roof terrace acknowledges that there will be noise, but without a full noise assessment, we don't know the impact of this or how much these will mitigate. The basin is an echo chamber. Multiple communal rooms overlooking the water would change a nature-focused context into one where loud voices and music dominate and change the space. No mitigation is in place for this. The proposal has 121 tenants plus overnight guests in a building with short tenancies. If tenants decide to wait till the end of their stay to have a party, a warning or CCTV would make no difference. 2 all-night parties on the roof terrace of 333 Kingsland Road showed what life would be like here. They also have 24-hour professional on-site management, but they nor the police could stop it. No measures can prevent people having a party, and everyday noise would be a massive issue too. 333 Kingsland Road has locked their communal roof terrace, but this wouldn't be an option in this proposal, which relies on this space. We ask that the committee reject this proposal on the basis that it is an agent of change and will adversely affect the peace and tranquility of the basin, amenity and quality of life for the existing community.
Thank you very much. Well kept to time, everybody. Charles, please.
Chair, thank you. Members, good evening. When this application was considered in February, the committee specifically requested further information regarding the co-living element of the proposal, particularly how the co-living element complies with planning policy. Your committee report provides a detailed assessment of the scheme against policy, confirming that the application, and particularly the co-living element, is fully policy compliant, and a policy which the council formally adopted only earlier this month. However, I would like to take the opportunity to say a little bit further about the co-living element scheme before touching on some of the wider benefits of the project as a whole. Co-living, or purpose-built shared housing, is a form of residential accommodation that meets the needs of adult sharers as an alternative to a traditional house or flat share or HMO accommodation. People have been sharing houses and flats for decades, but the accommodation is not specifically designed for multiple adults to share. So there are often shortcomings in the accommodation, such as different and undersized bedrooms, not enough bathrooms for the number of occupiers, limited and sometimes no communal space, and lack of privacy. Within the proposed co-living accommodation at Kingsland Road, each occupier has their own private room that includes a sleeping area, private bathroom, living area, and compact kitchen facilities, along with access to communal facilities. By providing the accommodation in this way, each resident gets far more private space than they would do in a house or a flat share, along with access to communal areas where they can interact and socialise with their fellow residents in a safe and managed environment. The current pandemic has highlighted the importance of our living environments, and the proposed co-living accommodation would provide larger private space than a traditional house share, managed communal spaces that would be regularly cleaned, and access to on-site co-working and home working spaces, which are likely to become increasingly important in the future. There is a genuine need to provide more and better private rented accommodation in Hackney, including for sharers. The number of private renting households in Hackney has increased significantly over the last 2 decades. In Haggerston, sharing households currently account for 42% of private rented accommodation. Between 2018 and 2023, sharers are predicted to experience 15% growth and to account for 1/3 of new households in the borough. However, the private rented sector is currently dominated by non-professional, absentee landlords, and there are a number of well-documented issues with private rented flats and houses. We're all well aware of the housing challenge that we face in Hackney and across London. and we need to find new ways of tackling this problem, which includes providing accommodation which is designed to meet the needs of its occupiers. The applicant team have undertaken extensive research to understand the needs of the residents that this project will serve. We've spent hundreds of hours over the last 3 years talking to people who currently live in houses and flat shares in Hackney to understand their needs and how they can be better catered for. Time and time again, we've heard the same problems faced by real Hackney residents who live in shared accommodation, including poor quality accommodation, poor maintenance, undersized rooms, under-provision of communal space, unresponsive landlords, unfair evictions, and unjustified rent increases. We've used this research to directly inform the proposals for Kingsland Road, working with PH Plus Architects, who recently won the National Housing Architect of the Year award, to design a housing offer that's high quality and genuinely resident focused. Co-living is not a silver bullet solution to our housing challenge, but it can contribute towards the range of housing options that are available in Hackney, and for many people will provide a much better alternative to traditional house and flat sharing. There are many other important benefits of this proposal, notably the delivery of a significant amount of employment space, including affordable employment space, which is the key planning policy objective given the site's location within a preferred office location. It's also important to note that this project is fully funded, and so if permission is granted, the development will come forward, which is increasingly important given the wider economic circumstances. The construction stage of the project will generate over 250 jobs with a commitment to maximise local employment opportunities and will result in additional expenditure in the local area. Once operational, the development will support over 200 jobs, again with a commitment to maximise local employment, and will contribute some in the region of £750,000 each year in local spending, which will help boost the Hackney economy. Members, we are conscious that this is not a form of development the committee has seen before, and so it is right that the application has been robustly scrutinised. We've worked with your officers for well over 2 years to bring this proposal forward, which will create much needed employment space and a new form of housing with a high quality and sustainable new building. We have listened and wherever possible responded to the concerns raised by our neighbours, and we will continue to work with the community should permission be granted. For example, we're happy to continue to work with our neighbours in developing the final management plan for the building, including coming back to this committee if appropriate for final approval. Members, as set out in the report, this application complies with the Council's very recently adopted planning policies, and so we request that the committee follow the officer's recommendation and grant consent this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start trying with questions this evening. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I guess my first question is to you, Charles, and that is, we've heard the target audience for your development, and it's broadly singletons living in flat share at the moment that live and work in Hackney. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct, Chair.
If we were to approve this, we would want a copper-bottomed, and I'm suggesting a condition and a legal agreement to make that the case. So this can't turn into Airbnb or hotel or endless other possibilities that it could be. Now, there are a couple of conditions in here. I think that possibly we could convert some of that to a legal agreement. I'm going to ask Steve later in a minute. In terms of the spirit of what you're suggesting, is that sort of thing acceptable to you?
Chair, it is, and I think we're quite happy to put in place whatever conditions you think are needed in order to give you that assurance. And I think one way in which we could provide that assurance is as well as making sure those conditions are clearly defined to ensure that people cannot use this as temporary and hotel type of accommodation, which is partly reflected in our suggestion that we increase the minimum stay to 6 months, which is the minimum amount of time you can ask somebody to sign an AST. I'm quite happy that we agree various reporting mechanisms so that we have a proper audit of who's staying in the property so that we can demonstrate going forward that this is being used for people who would otherwise be living in house and flat shares in the borough. Okay,
now Steve, does that make sense to you in terms of coming up with a copper-bottom reassurance?
Yeah, I guess, you know, including heads of terms in the section 106 would definitely make it more secure and in terms of enforceability, I think it could be justified because, you know, if you look at the sort of build to rent policies, they have the require, you know, minimum tenancy period requirements and things like that, which go into the Section 106. So doing something similar here wouldn't be that different to that.
Okay, my second question before, and it relates to the reason for deferral, is to talk to is it Cleary, Neil Cleary? Neil, what do you think about this accommodation in terms of meeting a need out there? I know it's not an affordable offer, but clearly it'll be cheaper than, I guess, buying a flat or whatever. So what's the strategic housing view of this?
Yeah, I think from a housing point of view, it's not going to solve all of our issues in terms of housing need, but it does provide for a form of housing and provides for sort of a range of different type of housing across the borough. I think the where it sits, and as it's been mentioned in the presentation and the applicant's submission, is that it sits in the offer where otherwise people would be in flat and house shares. So it's not the case that it's comparable to, say, living in self-contained one-bed or studio apartments, but there is provision there in terms of if somebody wanted to have something that's slightly more secure than maybe a flat or a house share with shared accommodation, then that offer is there. So it provides an additional option for a range of housing types in Hackney.
Thank you. And Steve, coming back to you, the issue of affordable housing is I think it's ruled out because the first port of call is for commercial development, isn't it, on that space? So we're not looking for affordable housing, we're looking for market housing that supports it all.
Yeah, in terms of you know, the affordable housing, we go about it in a very similar way to a normal residential development in a priority office or priority industrial area. So firstly, the policy requires that, you know, it seeks an employment-led development. So in this case, we've got more than 50% of the floor space is in employment type uses. So that means it is an employment-led development. So that meets those employment policies. And then we look to see whether it's, and then we sort of interrogate the viability of the development to see whether whether it's financially viable to provide affordable housing as part of that remaining sort of 50% housing within the development. In this case, we have assessed the viability. It does raise some challenges because it's it's quite a new sort of type of housing product. So we've had external consultants reviewing it who've had experience of reviewing other co-living developments as well, and we've looked. So we've also looked at viability, testing different options. For instance, if you reduce the amount of employment floor space, so it was no longer an employment-led development, but it had more residential, would that unlock more affordable housing? And so, you know, none of these options really sort of, deliver, make it feasible to deliver affordable housing on site. But we have secured a contribution, given the sort of the uncertainties you get in a viability appraisal about what rent levels can be achieved and so on for the commercial space or for the residential. So given the uncertainties around in the appraisal, the applicants have offered a contribution in lieu of a review mechanism. So that's detailed in the committee report as well.
Okay, and why is that 500,000 going to contribute to, I don't know, half a dozen affordable flats or whatever, lower cost flats for key workers or something like that?
Yeah, I mean that contribution could be used somewhere elsewhere in the council's affordable housing programme. So it could be
on site.
Sorry, yeah. On site, the amount that's secured is relatively small, so it's not going to deliver. It could be equivalent to affordable intermediate type affordable house. If we use that 500,000 elsewhere, it would be the equivalent of perhaps 2 intermediate affordable housing units. So it's not a very large contribution. If you use that on site, there could be the possibility of having a below discount market rent type rooms, some of the rooms to be let at discount market rent, but it wouldn't be very many. And given the sort of the managed nature of the development and so on, it seems that it'd probably be more practical to just use that money elsewhere in another project.
I might come back to that. Okay, thank you very much. That's my sort of questions that I've started off with. So we'll go around members. Members, you don't have to ask questions. We've been through this before, but Katie, I know you were concerned last time about this issues. Please.
Yes, thank you. I mean, to me, this development is clearly about sort of maxing out the value on the site. And to me, the question for us as a committee isn't sort of what we think of co-living, because clearly it is a lawful form of development, whatever our personal views of this may be. But I think we have to ask ourselves, does the site qualify for this exceptional type of development? I mean, the fact that something's untested doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. But I think some of the arguments we've heard, I mean, to me, the answer to the fact that a lot of landlords behave badly towards private renters in Hackney is to regulate those landlords, rather than say that this is a solution. I accept that the applicant isn't saying it's a silver bullet. I'm not against high density development at all, actually. What I'm interested in is, does this meet the housing needs of people in Hackney? And my fundamental disquiet is to do with the space standards, because I don't think that a sort of shared space really is a substitute for private space. I've lived in student accommodation, I've lived in house shares, and this feels like kind of both but not quite either.
Okay, do you have any questions?
Do I have questions? I'd like to hear more about the noise assessment, about noise from the roof terrace. I appreciate we've been told about mitigating factors such as a management plan and CCTV, but could we have an actual have some more information on the actual assessment of the noise that could be caused by the occupants when using the roof terrace, and how that was addressed in the noise assessment?
Okay, Steve.
Okay, so in terms of noise assessments, typically the way they work is, if you're assessing the noise impact from something that's emitting the noise, it could be plant and machinery, for instance, or from a or then what you do is you work out the noise level that's been generated by this emitter, and then work out what how far the affected windows and so on are, and what the noise levels will be at those affected facades. So, I mean, in this case, this is what's proposed here is a residential terrace. It's a communal residential terrace. It hasn't got. It's in the same way that it's just. We also approve other residential developments with communal terraces, where we don't require noise assessment, because it's something that's considered to be generally, provided it's managed okay, a reasonable thing to have as part of a residential development. In this case, I mean, I don't think there'd be much value. We don't normally require it. That's why we haven't in this case. And also, if you were to have a noise assessment, it would, any assessment would be dependent on what the noise level would be from the terrace. But you can't, that's highly dependent on management. If it's managed well, then the noise levels from that terrace are likely to be, equivalent to most other communal residential roof terraces, which don't, generally cause too much nuisance for neighbouring properties.
So, Steve, this is an environmental health issue, isn't it, and a police issue if there's a riot on the roof? and a management issue on behalf of the. It's not a planning issue per se, is it?
I would think, yeah, if there's any problems, they're much more likely to be effectively addressed through management, and yeah, I think in this case it is going to be quite a sort of a managed environment. I think, you know, it would be. I think it would feel the roof terrace spaces would feel different to a conventional sort of, you know, self-contained residential with a communal terrace where it's not always so clear that you know, who's looking after that space. I think here, you know, it would be pretty clear.
Is the limit on the number of people? All the 121 people can't go up there at the same time.
We have the management plan, so I mean, I suppose the management plan could put a limit on that. We'd expect us to put limits on hours when it can be used.
Let's do that then. Okay. Can I ask then, Susan? Any questions?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. So I'm not too sure if I should go ahead and ask all or just...
Yes, 2 questions.
Okay. Or just the first question that I want to ask is this is one of the reasons why we deferred this application back in February was about what Katie mentioned in terms of, is it helping us to tackle housing problems in Hackney? And I just want to find out, the sort of housing problem we have here in the borough is to get people onto a suitable accommodation for them. And I heard the point of minimum of 6 months tenancy agreement. But having said that, when it still remains a sort of accommodation that is not a sort of accommodation that people who are living there are part of the community, in terms of people are just passing by, having even with our policy in terms of housing letting in this borough, you need to establish a 3 years connection to Hackney to be recognized as having a strong connection with the borough. So people coming here for 1 year, 6 months, to me, there is an issue about it, still a great issue about that. In Hackney, we want to build community, people that will have attachment to our community rather than people that are passing through. So this is a concern, and I would like Charles to speak more about this. One of the things we asked in February is to, if possible, to provide us with similar accommodation in London. The similar accommodation that have been either in progress in London. Yes, they are in London, but we cannot compare Feltham, Ealing, or Stratford to Hackney. Those are the areas, the one provided on here. That is the first one. And the second one I want to ask is in terms of the excavation. I would like to know better as part of the objection in here, both from the objectors, the design and heritage and historic England, around the excavation of the 2-level excavation that will harm the basin of the canal. So again, I would like Stephen to speak more about that.
Okay.
Councillor, sorry, 1 minute. Councillor Levy is not here today, and I'll pick on about the parking. I know they said there are going to be 2 parking facilities provided on Lee Street. I would like to find out how far away would that be to the development. The whole point around providing parking for disabled people is to have easy access. So if you're going to be parking 5 minutes away from where you live, you need to walk back. That is not a provision of parking. to me. So again, I would like more information about that.
Charles, let's start with you then, please, on that first question about the residents you'll be expecting, I guess, and the examples you've given us.
Chair, thank you. And I think the point about the examples in the committee report, it is relevant. I appreciate they're not Hackney examples, but it's relevant from a planning policy point of view, because the planning policy test is whether it provides good quality accommodation, and therefore looking at what has been approved elsewhere, either by local planning authorities or inspectors, is really useful. And what we can see from the analysis in the committee report is that on a comparative basis, this proposal provides much better, much larger accommodation, much larger room types, and much more communal space than has been approved elsewhere. So I think I hear what Councillor says about them not being Hackney examples, but I think from a planning policy compliance point of view, they are relevant. And I think, you know, qualitatively and quantitatively, what's being proposed here is significantly better than other examples of similar kinds of accommodation. But as was set out in the officer's report, is also significantly better than the kinds of spaces that you would get in a house share. You would get significantly more private space than you would if you were living in a house share where your bedroom might be 8 to 12 square metres at best. In terms of the residents and the community point, unfortunately 6 months is the shortest amount of time that you can ask somebody to sign up to a assured short-hold tenancy. That's unfortunately just the way it goes. You can't ask somebody to sign up for longer. We clearly want people to stay as long as possible, which is why we want to offer people the opportunity to sign up for up to a 3-year tenancy, to give people that security of tenure that they don't get if they're in many house and flat shares, where landlords can turn around at a moment's notice, and once they're outside their initial 6 months on their AST, they can serve notice and give them literally a month to move on. We all know, I'm sure, of instances of that. So the operator wants people to stay for as long as possible, because the more people move in and out, the more voids there are, the more periods where rooms aren't being rented. So it's not in anyone's interest for people to be coming and going short term. So the 6 months is simply a product of how this kind of accommodation has to be rented from a tenure point of view in an AST. But the reality is people will be staying significantly longer and be given the opportunity to sign up for much longer terms, to give them that security of stay, to give them that permanence, to give them that assurance that they're going to know where they are in 3 years' time, know what their rent's going to be in 3 years' time, and not have this potential risk of a landlord serving notice for whatever reason because he wants his property back.
Thank you. Steve, the basement.
The basement is not sort of strictly it's not I think it's more of a building regulations kind of issue. And if it's issues around the kind of structural soundness of the development and the impact it will have on the basin next door, I suppose it is of some relevance in terms of sort of conservation and things, but it's not I don't think it's a really big consideration for us, really. I mean, it provided the development complies with building regs.
Thank you. Kazim, the car parking, can it be any closer, or what's the story with the 80 metres? I think you've got to walk.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Thomas. I can quickly present my screen and just show where the bays are proposed to be. If I could do that very quickly, it just help conversation. Are you able to see my screen now?
We are. It's coming up any second. Yes.
Perfect.
Wow.
So this is the application site, and the 2 bays are proposed to be on Lee Street. We'll identify the nearest kind of available 2 bays, and as Steve has pointed out, that it's just a really constrained site, and in particular the frontage of the site is really constrained. So in this instance, we felt that provision on Lee Street would be best. I suppose we need to also think about the crossing facilities along Kingsland Road, but as mentioned, these are the closest kind of practical spaces that we could provide. So yeah, 50, 60 meters minimum, which is not ideal. However, they are the nearest 2 available spaces on the public highway.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just to follow on that quickly. what happened to people that live on Lee Street that might need disabled parking? Can they park in that bay as well, or would that bay be exclusive to that premises, to this new development?
The bays on Lee Street that are being proposed would be open for use by other residents in the borough, and that's the same for any disabled bays that are proposed to go on street using the public highway. So that's, I suppose, the difference between having something on site or on street.
Okay, Brian. Brian, are you there?
Yeah, microphone was off.
Any question?
It's not a question. I'm just totally unconvinced that we couldn't have delivered affordable housing on this site.
Okay.
If we tried harder.
Okay. So Steve, can we go through again why we can't deliver why we're not looking for affordable housing on this site? I think that's the issue, Brian.
Well, I'm looking forward.
Peter, Stephen.
Yeah, I think we are looking for it, but after we've made sure it's a employment-led development, and so I mean that's always a bit of a compromise, and you've got a number of policy sort of requirements you're trying to deliver on and competing requirements. So that does affect the ability to provide affordable housing. So we do have a lot of, on a number of occasions, you might have developments in priority office areas or priority industrial areas with less than 50% affordable housing, or sometimes even no affordable housing. Perhaps we've reviewed the viability of the development. Perhaps Harry might want to add something on that sort of review process.
Harry.
Sure. Yeah. So the viability was reviewed by an independent consultant, and it was concluded that yes, the scheme as it is could not provide any affordable housing. We did then test if you changed commercial space to co-living, if that would help the scheme. Now it did help the scheme a bit, but it would still not be able to provide affordable housing. And then obviously you would lose that element of commercial space. So say if you change the first floor to co-living, you would lose about 14,000 square foot of commercial space, which goes against the policy of it being in a priority employment area. We also tested whether if you change the co-living to a private residential or a sales scheme, whether that would help the viability. And again, that would not be able to provide affordable housing.
Brian, any more? Oh, okay. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I think all my questions are for officers, really. And perhaps I haven't picked up the detail in the written report, in which case I apologise. The last discussion on this was concerned about two areas, I think, impact on the basin and the wildlife, which I think is well addressed in the additional evidence provided. What I don't think we particularly picked up on, and I've picked up on this time, is the argument, I think it's from Historic England, that in fact there is heritage value on the frontage onto Kingsland Road. And I just wondered at any stage whether one had, officers had discussed whether there was an alternative model that might actually keep that frontage, which is of course part of the conservation area. The other thing that I'm interested in is, okay, we have to look at the potential commercial space developed, to say it's primarily a commercial development, but is there any way that Travis Perkins' objection can be part of our consideration? And in particular, what I worry about is there was an argument that a lot of builders, merchants, etc. closed down when congestion charge was brought into the city. And to have builders, merchants, as part of our wider transport policy, is there any way that we have considered the importance of getting building materials close to central London to prevent the extra car journeys? I don't know, this might be for Cassim rather than economic development, but have we actually considered the importance of maintaining building supply providers close to the place they're used to reduce transport across the borough? And then lastly, and this is really my fault for not listening properly earlier, what we have is very detailed management arrangements. And I didn't fully understand the conversation that Vincent was having when we started this discussion. Please, can someone just explain to me how we are going to make sure those, to me, in planning, you're looking at a building, you're not particularly looking at management. And I just want to know how those management arrangements are going to be defended and how enforceable they're going to be if we move forward and if this place gets sold on to some alternative owner. So can someone walk me through what was suggested by Vincent earlier, what we're going to do?
Okay, I'll help. Charlie, first on the Travis Perkins building itself.
In terms of the significance of the existing buildings on site, according to Historic England and also in terms of our own assessment, we've established that the buildings make a sort of limited positive contribution to the conservation area, particularly because of its historic connection. Well, the reference to the historic uses in the area. The building has very, as assessed by our principal conservation officer, the building has very limited architectural merit. Nevertheless, it does have some value in terms of its historic associations with the sort of historic uses. So therefore, for that reason, the demolition of the building is considered to have a degree of harmful impact. However, when you look at the context and sort of its relationship to existing buildings and buildings that have how the area has evolved and sort of other modern development in the area, and also due to its limited architecture value, the demolition, the demolition is considered to make a sort of a small degree of harm, which has been considered to be outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme, as outlined in Steve's report. In terms of the reuse of the building, perhaps the agent would like to expand on that, but the applicants have submitted a statement as part of the application, which looked at the sort of restrictions in terms of the reuse of the building and how that would prevent sort of a high quality sort of development being possible on the site with the retention of the buildings as they are. And also the condition of the building, the structural sort of conditions, and sort of the suitability of that structure for new development to happen on site. So yes, it is acknowledged that there is a small degree of harm to, particularly to the character and sort of the historic association with the site, but being the building a 1950s building of very limited architectural merit, having suffered some alterations over time, it was considered that the harm which would emerge through the demolition would be outweighed by the benefits of the scheme. Architecturally, the proposal is quite high quality. There are conditions there to ensure that the materiality is going to be appropriate. It's well articulated. The massing has been very sensitively designed to address the different sort of constraints and situations in the context of the site. So officer's opinion is that the harm, the less than substantial harm that would arise from the demolition would be outweighed by the benefits, and that has been the conclusion. But perhaps if members would like a little bit more in terms of the the reuse of the building and why that wasn't possible, perhaps the agent could expand a little bit more on that. But that was a document as part of the planning application documents that was submitted. I hope that was...
You happy with that? Yeah. Okay, Steve. So, Steve, can we have the question about the builders merchants itself? Are there any planning policies to defend building merchants?
Unfortunately, yeah, there's not any specific policies around retention of builders merchants, which is, sort of why we've considered so I mean, there are policies around priority industrial areas, priority office areas, looking to re-provide employment floor space. So we've tried to sort of meet those policies with new floor space as part of the development, but I think we felt that there isn't really any sort of policy justification to require retention of the builders merchants.
Natalie, why is that? You should know this.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think we've obviously looked at this as part of the new local plan. So that's why we've looked at the new designations of priority industrial areas across the borough to ensure that that kind of land use remains and that you can have those types of uses. So it's not possible to protect individual types of uses within the use class, but we certainly, through the local plan across the borough, have looked to ensure that we've got appropriate new designations through priority industrial areas, as well as these new priority office areas, which this site falls into.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Steve, could you explain? I was hoping to come up with a legal agreement and conditions that would essentially deliver what Charles tells us he wants, and that is local places for local people. And how will we be able to defend that, Peter is asking?
Yeah, so in terms of enforcement, so we'll have the management plan. So that can set out details around hours of the use of the roof terraces and numbers of people up there and things like that. So that should, if it's meant to be closed after a certain time and it's still open, then we can serve a breach condition notice, and also against any other sort of breaches against the management plan. There's also environmental health legislation in terms of noise, nuisance and antisocial behaviour. And then we can, if we have heads of term in the section 106 around the sort of length of the tenancy periods and things like that, in the same way that we would do for a build to rent development, then that there would also, and we could also, as Charles has mentioned, perhaps some sort of monitoring, yearly return or something like that on these figures that's submitted to the monitoring team. The section 106 monitoring team perhaps could would allow for some for on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Yes, Chair.
Susan.
Thank you. My other question is, I want Steve to comment on the...
1 minute. Peter, could you put your camera on, please? Peter? Peter, are you there?
Sorry, I am here, and as I say, I'm in my mother's old house, and I could hear her trying the door, so I wanted to check she was all right.
We need to be in sight. We can't. Okay.
I was in hearing, if not in sight.
Okay. Question, please.
The question is to ask Steve to comment on the historic England or comment on page 95 in terms of drawing the attention to section 72 of the planning in terms of preserving, enhancing the character or appearance of a conservation area. And the other thing is still on conservation, because it seems we have not actually discussed the conservation implication on this application that much. If you can comment on Councillor John Burke's or submission as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
I mean, Luciana did comment a bit on the sort of heritage aspects. Perhaps she might want to continue a bit more on the impact on the conservation area.
Yes, in terms of the particular section of the Act that is referred to in Historic England's response, that there is a presumption in favour of the preservation of the special character and appearance of the conservation area, and that has been taken into account. We have made an assessment of what level of contribution the existing building makes to the character and appearance of the conservation area. We have looked at the sort of the justification for the demolition of the building, which has been presented by the applicants, why the buildings couldn't be retained, and what are the positives of having it replaced. As I explained in response to Councillor Snell's question. We also have looked at the quality of the new development. So there is a demolition side, but there's also, which was perhaps what I concentrated my previous response on, but there's also what level of contribution the proposed development makes to the character and appearance of the conservation area. And we have considered that in terms of its scale and massing, and in terms of the articulation of the elevations, the quality of the materials, the choices of materials, the rhythm in which the elevations have been designed. All of this does not cause harm to the conservation area. So we feel that the requirements of the Act in terms of presumption in favour of the proposed development is considered to be in character with the conservation area, and therefore hence our positive recommendation. I don't know whether Councillor Thomas would like
sorry, Chair, you just said that you've looked into that and assessed, not your word, but what I understand with your response is you've made an assessment that the harm does not outweigh the benefit. Again, to be honest with you, I still don't have a grasp on the benefit of this development to Hackney residents. And having said that, I'm talking about the wildlife or the ecologic implication that John Burke mentioned in his submission. And if you can comment on that as well.
Oh yes, I
don't think what we are doing here will have an adverse impact on the wildlife in the area.
I'll leave that part to Steve, because I was trying to address the first part of your question in relation to the response from Historic England, but in terms of wildlife and the benefits of the scheme, I'll leave that with Steve.
Tyler, could you tell us your response to concerns about the ecology? Is that the question you're asking, Susan?
That is the question.
Tyler, please. Is Tyler with us?
Sorry, was that addressed to me, Julian Arthur, Tyler Grange?
Tyler Grange. Sorry, yes, Julian. Yes, please.
Sure. So just as a bit of background, I've been an ecologist for 20 years, and I've actually worked in this area and around Kingsland Basin for over 15 and seen how the area's changed significantly. It's included a lot of new development, but at the same time, the ecology of the area, and particularly the waterways, has improved a great deal, and much of that's as a result of Gideon's and his colleagues' work, which I can only applaud, actually. But the last 15 years has shown that the development, which is around the basin, which is similar to what was proposed, can and should be happy bedfellows, which is the case with this proposed development as well. We've obviously undertaken a lot of surveys, and there's some good data out there, and I think much can be learned from the adjacent development as well. But we've obviously done a lot of work and brought in other specialists, including the fisheries specialists that we've brought in, and we've obviously listened to Gideon's and other comments regarding spawning fish. So I mean, overall, I'm confident that what we've demonstrated, the proposals are acceptable from an ecology perspective, and are actually beyond what planning policy and other regulatory requirements necessitate. and given the features built into the scheme, it should enhance the local biodiversity.
Thank you, and I can attest to the number of developments that have come along. We've had concerns about biodiversity, yet it seems to improve all the time, and people are defending what's there a lot of the time. Susan, you asked about the benefits to the borough of this planning application or the permission. I think, Stephen, could you tell us what the benefits are in the planning benefits are that justify this compared to Luciana's what was it, partial concern about the conservation issues?
Yeah, so I mean, there is a section in the report actually, I think, where it sets this out. So yeah, we've identified less than substantial harm in terms of impact on the heritage assets conservation area, but I mean, there are, first of all, there are other sort of design and conservation benefits from the proposal in terms of kind of rebuilding the street frontage, and also we think the architectural quality of the development is of a high standard. So it's modern, high quality, contemporary design, which will add to the character of the area over time. And then there are also other non-design, non-conservation type benefits as well, in terms of the proposal will increase the will sort of maximize the employment potential of the site with new employment floor space, which is should hopefully sort of meet up-to-date business needs, and also there is additional housing of a type provided as well. So I mean, yeah, I think that is set out in one of the paragraphs in the conservation design section of the report.
And Steve, am I right that this fulfills some of the housing requirement that the borough is required to deliver, albeit not 3-bedroom family housing for affordable housing?
Yeah, so I mean, the council has housing targets for all types of housing, private housing, and also affordable housing. The LP policies do set out a preference for self-contained residential accommodation, but they also recognise that other types of housing, for instance, this type of housing can help to sort of add to the overall mix of housing. Yeah, it certainly doesn't meet housing needs in terms of affordable housing. It's definitely a private housing product, but it does sort of add to the mix of accommodation and perhaps meet needs of certain people that aren't that well served by current provision.
And indeed, if they weren't served by this place, they would be looking at the various options that they have, which is other probably 3-bedroom house shares, etc., or other accommodation elsewhere in the borough. So clearly it does deliver something for some people, and takes the pressure off the general housing market, I guess.
Thanks, Chair. Talking about housing and affordability, and I just want, in terms of provision of social housing, I know there is a contribution of $500,000, and I don't know how we arrive at that, because to me, this development contributing 500,000 to social housing, affordable housing. I don't know how we reach at that. The proportion looks so small to me, so I don't know why that is.
Natalie, did you want to come in? No, Natalie.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yep. So we obviously we have a housing target that is embedded in the new local plan. So we've set a target where we have to deliver 1,330 homes a year. And that's our overall target. So that's a combination of affordable and market housing. So this development will help contribute to meeting that target. That is important in that respect. Of course, we know the overwhelming need in the borough is for affordable housing. So we do try to maximise delivery of affordable housing where possible in all schemes. In terms of, like with all the developments, we look at what's viable and what can be delivered in terms of meeting our affordable housing targets. Neil might want to say a few more things about the affordable housing and how that will be used and the benefit that will bring as part of this development.
Neil,
something?
Yeah, just to say, as members will know well, we've got a well-established regeneration programme, and that when we take contributions in lieu from donor sites, we have a number of schemes that we can spend our contributions on. As identified in the report, £500,000 is very roughly it costs us roughly one social rent unit, or 2 or 3 intermediate units, so it would go towards our generation programme.
thank you. I think the point is that, Susan, that it's been demonstrated that this site can't deliver affordable housing because we are looking for employment space, and that's what the priority for that particular area is. It's not for affordable housing on that area, and so we'd struggle to justify affordable housing on employment land. Is that fair?
That is fair, Chair. I understand that. That's why my question is on the contributions to affordable housing of 500,000. That's why I'm asking that question. I do appreciate the fact that it's an employment or priority area. So my question is, how did we arrive at that? As Neil said, 500,000 we only probably offer you.
Okay, can we ask Harry Wackett? He's the person who talks about. Harry.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I said, the conclusion was the scheme couldn't support any affordable housing, but we're going to implement a late stage review mechanism. But the applicant made the offer of £500,000 contribution up front, basically in lieu of the review mechanism, and having reviewed what the likely contribution would be when the review was triggered, this was a superior offer. So effectively, it was concluded that was a better offer than having a review mechanism in the Section 106.
Okay. Any more questions, anybody? Katie.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think one of the questions we asked when this was deferred was why conventional housing wasn't suitable for this site, given that we have a preference for this. And forgive me if I'm missing this in the report, but there doesn't seem to be any further detail on that.
Stephen.
Yeah, so there is an assessment on that in terms of in the report. When we look at the sort of the principle of co-living and the applicants have produced a statement which looks at that in more detail, and one of the what we're saying is that if the site is surrounded by other residential development, it would be we're not saying that it would be impossible to provide conventional housing on this site, but what the sort of justification that's been put forward by the applicant does show fairly convincingly. Actually, yeah, it's paragraph 6.1.13 of the report. That sets it out in a more detail. Is that if you could provide conventional residential housing, but it would result in a really sort of compromised development with much less employment floor space, because you'd have to have separate access entrances from the street, separate cores from the employment floor space. You'd also need to have an electricity substation that's accessible from the street. You don't currently, as part of a co-living, co-working development, you don't have to do that because it's managed 24 hours, so that can be put in the basement. So all the it would, what this result, having the proposal as it is, it means you can really sort of maximize the employment floor space that's delivered as part of the proposal, and make for a much more kind of efficient development that makes more of a contribution to the priority employment area.
Thank you. Any more? Okay, so I'm going to be suggesting that we add a condition, and that is that we and a legal agreement, so we get this copper-bottomed notion of it delivering for singletons that live in Hackney, associated with Hackney, etc., etc. The developer says he wants to deliver that, and so we should be making sure that happens. So if we support this evening, that will come forward and we'll have another look at it to check it. The recommendation is to grant conditional planning permission subject to conditions and completion of legal agreement. Now, what I would like you to do is we need to hold your hand up and keep it up, and then we'll go through how people are voting. So grant conditional planning permission subject to condition and the completion of legal agreement. All those in favour, please show. Okay, so I'm in favour. Peter, you're in favour. Brian?
Yes.
Abstain. Not convinced.
Okay, Susan?
Abstain, not convinced. Thank you.
And Katie?
Against.
Okay, so that's 4 on against. Thank you very much. That is right. We'll have 10 minutes break if we can. So now it is, what time is it? 6 minutes past 8. If we could come back at 8:15, please. Thank you.
About 3.5 minutes.
Okay, so I'll be letting that be quick.
Sorry, Chair, just before we kick off, I wasn't here at the beginning for declarations of interest. So just to confirm on this one, I've seen a campaign including a poster on the front door to my building, and I believe I've had emails from wildlife gardeners of Haggerston about it as well, which I forwarded on.
Okay, we're ready then. Gerard, Brian, are you here with us, or your camera's gone off?
Councillor Bell, are you with us? Councillor Bell's microphone's muted as well.
Well, I should just.
Shall I send him a message, Chair?
Yeah, Brian, are you there?
Oh, yes, right.
Okay, in the flesh, so to speak. Gerard, please.
Yes. Now, hopefully, you will be shortly seeing the presentation.
Yep.
Okay. Right. Well, this item it concerns another canal side development. This time, it's a site called 2 to 4 Osmond Road, which is also known as Canal Side Studios. Now, these are some photographs of the site. The building, you can see roughly in the center of the building is some live-work units that have, through the effluxion of time, become residential units. To the right is another commercial building, and further to the right is number 6 Osmond Road. That's the entrance to the site from Osmond Road itself. That is the wider site that you can see, and the building that you can see sort of in the background that has the pipe running up it is a mixture of residential and live work and commercial units. These are the Canal Side Studios themselves, and this is another view taken from the northern side of the Regent's Canal. This is one of the site notices that was erected in connection with the first round of consultation. And this is a site notice that was put up in relation to the second round of consultation. Now, the blue line that you can see covers the wider ownership of the site, which includes the Canal Side Studios buildings, but this application relates to the red line within the site. And there is going to be some elements of demolition of existing buildings on part of the existing building on the site, but that's quite a limited demolition, again on the first floor and on the second floor. And this drawing illustrates the extent of fabric that is going to be removed. Now, if we look at the proposed ground floor, there's going to be an entrance here on Osmond Road, which will link through to different aspects of the building, and it will lead through into the ground floor, which would have an office space, and these columns here at the canal edge would be supporting the building above, and there would be a through passageway here. We have going to get the pointer and use that. We have commercial refuse storage here, we have residential refuse storage here, and we have cycle parking here. And this drawing gives some greater detail
of the ground floor. Again, you've got your refuse storage here and here, cycle parking, and an entrance to the ground floor commercial unit with a further access into this effectively undercroft. On the first floor, the building would be the full, would overhang the undercroft, as with the second floor, and the third floor would be set back from the western elevation of the building by about 50%, and it would be in line with the current western elevation of the southern building at Canal Side Studios. And this is the roof, which would have photovoltaics and a living roof. Now here we can see the proposed north elevation, and the architecture is somewhat, it's got both horizontal and vertical emphases, which is in keeping with the emerging pattern of development on this bank of the canal. And we have the proposed east elevation, and you can see that these windows, which would be closest to the windows of Canal Side Studios, are actually due to be obscure glazed, and there is a condition relating to that in recommendation A. This is the proposed south elevation, and again we have obscure glazed windows. And this is the proposed southern elevation as viewed from Osmond Road. This is the proposed west elevation, which is the one towards facing towards Whitmore Road Bridge. And this is a contextual northern elevation. Now this red line here indicates the bulk of the scheme that was refused last year, and this is a proposed section, and this is a visualization from Kingsland Basin. This is a visualization from Kingsland Bridge, and I'd like to point out that in the initial scheme that was presented, this elevation would not have had any these windows in, and officers considered that it would have been too blank a facade, and we asked for windows to be put in to try and break up that elevation. And finally, this is a visualization from Osmond Road. Now, we've had significant representations and objections in relation to the application. There are some people who consider that putting an office building inside what is a largely residential complex would be an inappropriate use. However, this isn't a priority office area. It's within the Kingsland priority office area, and the land use is considered appropriate. And for new developments in POAs, we do seek that a minimum of 50% be commercial, and this is a 100% commercial scheme. There's been representation that it would disrupt the local community, but given that none of the building elements that currently house or accommodate people would be demolished, I'm not convinced that that would be the case. We've also had representations regarding overlooking, but as I noted both in the presentation and in the report, the building has been designed to avoid and to minimize overlooking of neighboring properties, especially through the use of obscure glazing. Some people consider the building would have an overbearing appearance, but as noted in the report and also in the addendum, it would not be significantly overbearing. There's concerns been raised about noise and disturbance both during the construction phase and during the operational phase. But noise and disturbance from construction work is rarely sufficient to warrant refusal of an otherwise acceptable scheme. And the commercial use proposed is by definition compatible with residential uses. We've had representations also regarding the design and heritage implications. This site is actually within two conservation areas. It's within the Kingsland Conservation Area, which is a linear conservation area running from the bottom end of Kingsland Road to almost the top end of Kingsland Road. And it's also in the Regent's Canal Conservation Area, which is again a linear conservation area running the length of the Regent's Canal. And it's in the Kingsland character area of the Regent's Canal and the canal character area of Kingsland. And a lot of representations have commented that this is the last undeveloped space on the canal bank, and it should be retained as such. However, an examination of historic maps indicates that there has been development on this site before. The buildings that are on site date from about the 1930s, so they're not necessarily associated with intensive canal use of the area, bearing in mind that canal use effectively for commercial activities in terms of boats going up and down finished in about 1947. And there have been previous appeal decisions which have criticised proposals for the site because they would shield, they would have hidden the existing buildings. But as you can see from the visualization here, as you can see from this elevation here, quite an extent of the canal side buildings would still be visible from the towpath side on the north of the canal. There's also been representations regarding the loss of amenity space, meaning this space here. And now this space is a sort of informal amenity space that has been is being used by some of the occupiers of the development. It was at one stage used for storing 4 shipping containers that were the subject of an unsuccessful planning application, an unsuccessful appeal, and an enforcement notice. And those containers have now been removed in accordance with the terms of the enforcement notice. So it's very much an ad hoc amenity space. However, the most significant representations that have been received are in relation to biodiversity, because as you could see from the photographs earlier, there is a significant amount of vegetation on the canal bank. Much of it is non-native species such as buddleia. There are other things, and there have also been concerns that the building would overshadow what is currently a not overshadowed section of the canal. And this permanent overshadowing, which is different from a dappled overshadowing that you could get from trees, for example, could have a detrimental impact on the aquatic ecology of the canal, and in particular invertebrates, which are at the bottom end of the food chain within the canal. And obviously the wildlife gardeners of Haggerston consider that this impact to the biodiversity of the canal, which is a site of importance for nature conservation, cannot be adequately mitigated against. However, the applicants have submitted an ecological appraisal which indicates that suitable mitigation measures can be put in place to enhance and improve the aquatic environment, which would include an additional 50 metres of floating habitat, amongst other, which provides a space for invertebrates and small fish to seek shade and to breed. to be put in place, and that approach is supported by the Canal and Rivers Trust, who are the statutory consortee with applications such as this. And the application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry, Gideon, please, 2 minutes.
For biodiversity, this site is unique because it is open and receives direct sunlight and is much less disturbed by people and dogs than the towpath side. The overshadowing this proposal will cause cannot be mitigated for nor compensated for. The daylight sunlight report did not include the water, the unique aspect of the site. An ecology survey should be carried out when the majority of species can be recorded. The January survey, while legally acceptable, will miss the majority of species present. The proposal should be pulled back from the waterway to provide a vegetated bank. Riparian green space would increase the long-term value of the development, as well as the biodiversity and the public amenity of the canal. The proposal in its current iteration should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been asked as planning consultant to Michael Ginn of Canalside Studios to convey his and other neighbouring leaseholders' continued concerns regarding this application. The previous scheme, as you know, was refused for 2 reasons. First, that the building would overwhelm the surrounding buildings and would be an inappropriate feature in the conservation area. The second, the building would be overbearing and result in overlooking and unacceptable loss of light and outlook. In short, we do not consider the scheme has successfully addressed these previous reasons for refusal and should not be approved in its current form. Whilst the height of the building has been reduced, there is little consideration to other design issues raised previously, including the footprint and positioning of the building. This has fundamentally not changed. There remains a huge reduction of important open space for residents and leaseholders, space that gives the courtyard its identity, quality, and ecological value and defines its contribution to the conservation area. Irrespective to whatever buildings may have been at the site historically, it is important, of course, to consider the contribution it makes now. The building's height, as seen in the canal elevations, remains incongruous, particularly in relation to Canalside Studios. Talking about the layout, concerns remain over the impact the reduced courtyard will have on vehicle manoeuvring, as well as increased pedestrian movements and potential breakout from offices in work breaks affecting existing residents' privacy. We also note that parking space 1 on the proposed layout is not achievable since it is on land demised to number 2.
Sorry, Matt, I can't hear you.
Matt, we've lost your sound. Matt, we've lost your sound. We can't hear you. Your microphone is on, but we can't hear you, Matt.
I think he's frozen
I
completely.
think it's frozen.
I can see it's Matt.
Matt is speaking, but we can't hear you. Matt, I'm going to assume that you can hear me. Mario, are you there? Can we okay, Mario. Any particular
Question. Accuracy of the figures, particularly those.
Matt.
Yes.
I'm afraid we missed a lot of that.
Oh, sorry.
We'll have to go back to when you were talking about office breakout and its impact on residents.
Apologies. Yes.
Not hearing you at all.
Okay, sorry that you missed a couple of paragraphs. We also note that parking space 1 on the proposed layout is not achievable since it is on land demised to number 2A, shown on the lease plan. On daylight, the committee report simply echoes the daylight sunlight report from the applicant. But being a crucial aspect of the scheme, we feel this demands more scrutiny, like the previous application was given. This is selectively dismissive of the relevance of canal-side studios, despite their lawful residential use, and the ground floor windows of Unit 1 in particular still fail the tests and have an unacceptable loss of sunlight hours. On overlooking, importantly, the proposed first and second floor windows facing west are in the same position as they were previously. Some newly added windows are to be obscured, as noted, but the ones that are in the same location are not. Previously, these formed part of the reason for refusal and were described as causing unacceptable levels of overlooking. What is the reason for this change in assessment? Of course, there is still increased overlooking and enclosure of the courtyard itself. So in short, we feel there are still outstanding issues from the previous refusal that have not been adequately addressed, and we have significant concerns over how detailed the scrutiny has been to the current submission. We therefore urge members not to support the scheme until such time as all of these important issues have been adequately addressed, whether that be through more detailed assessment or a revised design being submitted.
Thank you. Okay, Joe Haynes. 1 minute, Brian. Brian's here. Okay, Brian, could you keep your camera on? We have to have evidence that you're in the room with us. Sorry, Joe Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for your time this evening and for the opportunity to speak in support of the proposal. I would like to take this opportunity to thank council officers also for their time and advice during a lengthy pre-application procedure and during the course of the application. The proposal is for a 590 square metre office building in the Kingsland Priority Office area. It has a capacity to accommodate workspace for approximately 50 people in a highly accessible location. The building has been designed to accommodate 4 small businesses. For these reasons, it represents a significant opportunity to fulfil the purpose of the Priority Office Area designation. The architects, Nissen Richards, have engaged proactively with the council's design and conservation officers through pre-application and during the course of the application in order to bring forward a building that reflects the character of the local area. As a result, and I quote from your officer's report, the proposal would represent a contemporary interpretation of canal-side industrial architecture. The proposal complies with all London and local plan standards for transport. It is extremely well served by public transport. It is car-free, and provision has been made for secure storage of 16 bicycles. Looking at the adjoining amenity, the scale, mass, and position of the building protects the amenity of its nearest neighbours, and that reflects pre-application discussions and acknowledgement of the concerns that were raised with the previous application. We have submitted a daylight and sunlight assessment that demonstrates that neighbouring properties will not be significantly harmed through the loss of light. Obscure glazed windows have been included in the east and west elevations to prevent overlooking. The potential for dust and noise disturbance during construction is to be controlled by a construction management plan required by condition. Looking at the biodiversity issue, we acknowledge that concern has been raised about biodiversity along the canal. We've submitted an assessment of the biodiversity of the site and the canal. And we've had comments from a number of interested parties, including the Canal and River Trust. And the Trust has suggested measures which we have agreed to mitigate against potential harm and enhance the biodiversity of the canal, including surveys of the canal structure and construction methods to protect it, floating habitats, and the protection and reinstatement of biodiverse canal-side greenery. The applicant is committed to these measures. In summary, the proposal is for a commercial building capable of providing workspace for 50 people in a highly accessible location, which is designated for employment use. It's a a result of extensive consultation with Hackney's design and conservation officers, and care has been taken to protect the amenity of neighbours and the biodiversity of the canal and the canal side. In line with your officer's recommendation, I hope that you will grant planning permission this evening.
Thank you very much. We'll do this a little different. I'll go in reverse because Steve hasn't had a... Steve, are you able to ask a question first? And we'll go... the cat's turned up. I was wondering where the cat was.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind, Chair. I suppose my first question to officers would be around. I think that one of the central kind of issues here is that intersection between the priority office kind of status of the area versus the conservation kind of status of both the canal and the Kingsland area generally. I'd quite like to understand from officers sort of what the thinking is, both between the interaction between those two and kind of statuses, as it were, and then why we feel that this building is appropriate within that context, I suppose, with because it seems like we're prioritising the office kind of status rather than the conservation status. So I'd be interested to hear about that. And there's a point in the documents about all of the buildings now abutting one another, and there aren't voids in between as there have been historically. So I'd be interested in a view on why we're allowing those to come into kind of being along the canal, and just feel like a wall of buildings is kind of generating up on that side of the canal. And then to the developer, I think, and to the applicant, sorry, why there is such a need to build right up to the boundary of the canal itself, rather than to pull the building back somewhat. So those three questions, please, Chair.
Shall I jump in there in terms of our assessment in terms of the conservation area? Can you hear me okay?
Okay, yes.
So as Gerard mentioned, the site's it's quite unusual. It's in two conservation areas. It's in Kingsland and it's in Regent's Canal. In terms of its sort of relationship to its immediate context, it's more sort of, it relates more clearly, obviously, to the canal because it fronts onto the canal. So we've looked quite closely at the Regent's Canal Conservation Area appraisal, and the guidance in there talks about retaining heritage assets and introducing buildings of an appropriate scale within gap sites. Now, obviously, we realise that there is a gap there, but as we've mentioned, and it's mentioned in the report, historically there were buildings on the site, so that open sort of space, it's not sort of a historic gap that's been there forever. So there were 19th century warehouses that went, I think, in the early 20th century. So I think in terms of our assessment of this building, the things that we've focused on is that there is a gap maintained with the sort of historic two-storey range. So there is that sense of a gap still. The building that's going in there is of an appropriate scale. It's part 3, part 4 stories. And in terms of that scale and its relationship, that relates well to adjoining buildings. It's got a gap. It's got an appropriate gap with the 2-storey buildings, and then the buildings that it adjoins are 3 stories with pitched roofs. So the scale we feel is appropriate. And then finally, just in terms of the sort of overall design, it's very well balanced in terms of horizontal, vertical. It's simple in terms of its palette of materials. And sorry, just one other thing in terms of the positioning. Again, going back to sort of historic uses, it's very common for buildings to front onto the canal edge. And historically, Medway Wharf, which was the name of the buildings that were on the site previously, they fronted onto the canal. So our sort of overall assessment was that it wasn't harmful for the building in heritage sort of terms and design terms. It's not harmful for the building to front onto the canal, just as lots of other buildings do on that side and on the north side of the canal. Well, sorry, on the south side, because the north's got the towpath. So overall, our assessment is that this actually is an enhancement to the conservation area. The existing building, the 30s building's got lots of sort of flues and quite sort of ugly parts when you look at it from the towpath. And this will be a high quality building that we think, maintains that gap and is in keeping with the context.
Thank you. Gerard, have you got anything to add?
Yes, I do. I would add that I agree with Matt's comments about the impact to the conservation area, and I would also draw members' attention to the public benefit of the scheme, which is providing 590 square metres of employment floor space in a priority office area, which is defined as a public benefit. And when it comes to the canal side environment generally, it has been constantly changing since the canal was first built. If you go back and look at some of the historic maps, especially those that predate the Ordnance Survey, you'll find that bits of the canal were going through open countryside, other bits would have wharves, and it's been developed, buildings have been built, they've been knocked down. And if you go back to the 1970s and 1980s, a lot of the area around the Regent's Canal would have been very run down. There were derelict office buildings either side of the canal. And what we've seen over the past 30 or 40 years is a revitalization, as it were, of the canal side environment, and we're bringing active users into those canal side spaces that had been since the 1940s effectively been more or less redundant and presented a hostile rather than a more appealing attitude. And this change is just currently part of that ongoing process of change.
But I would say, sorry, Chair, do you mind me
Carry on.
coming back on that? I mean, the value of the canal in previous sorts of years over the course of its life has been as a commercial trade route. That's not the value necessary of the canal today. The value of the canal today is on leisure use, biodiversity, especially for this part of Hackney, which has very little green space and biodiversity in the area, and for people now who live on the canal. And so yes, you're right to say it's changing, but that's not to say I'm not sure that totally supports your thesis, and nor does it support Matt's point that the building should now abut up to the canal because they always used to. That's sort of you're sort of going back on your arguments a little bit there, I'm afraid. It's now no longer warehouses, and so I'm just a bit I'm still not totally sort of convinced by this idea that it's a natural, just office buildings for the sake of just office buildings along the canal, to the detriment of what the canal is now used for, and the value of the canal as it is now is not necessarily kind of sold to me, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry about that. Chair, I had a third point.
Abutted the canal as opposed to setting it all back.
Yeah. So I think that's for Joe, is it?
Yes, Joe.
So Joe, just in case you didn't catch the question, it was around why are you abutting the canal rather than setting back somewhat to give the canal a bit more breathing space?
Thank you. I would say we've taken our cue for the scale of development from local precedent, and I take your point that there's been a lot of development alongside the canal. We've also looked at the historic development alongside the canal as well, and we've assessed the impacts of our development on the biodiversity of the canal, and our ecology report submitted with the application finds that there's no harm and there's potential for enhancement. I would also point out that it's actually it's not a very big building. It's I think probably only 12 meters across. There's a gap either side of it within the site that we're not developing on. So I think that I hope would answer the question that we are building up to the edge of the canal, but we are not building right along the canal for the whole of the site.
Thank you. Going in reverse order then, Peter, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Right, a series of questions, partly following on, in fact, from what Steve was asking about. I'm not fully sure I've understood the. If I look at the CGI images on the background papers, there appear to be a number of colonnades along the ground floor adjacent to the canal. And I just, have I got that? Is that just a design feature, or is there actually some route through there? And is it a useful route? Is it going to be an outside circulation route? Can someone just talk me through what exactly is on the ground floor adjacent to the canal?
Okay. Andrea, you're looking through drawings?
Shall I come in there, Chair?
Yeah, surely.
Yeah, so it's Jim Richards here. Yes, there's a colonnade on the ground floor. As Joe previously stated, we're building up to the edge of the canal where the historic footprint of the wharf building sat. But to allow the connection across the full frontage of the site, at ground floor level, we've pulled the office back to allow people to get to the existing. There's a promontory into the canal, which is used by people who work and live at Canal Side Studios. So we can continue the use and access to that point. The building itself is, as Joe said, only 12 metres wide. We've maintained a gap of 12 metres to the western side and approximately 30 the whole frontage as they have at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that addresses some of Steve's concerns about enhancing current uses of the canal. So thank you for that clarification. You say that you want to take on the full recommendations of the Canals and River Trust. And I note that they do talk to have the new enhanced wildlife support, that they want to enter into an agreement with the wildlife gardeners of Haggerston. If they're still on this call, can I just check that that's going through, that they're ready to take up that offer? Because we've heard them praised already once tonight, and it seems to me that counters the other concerns. And I might ask all my three questions now, so I don't have to come back again. And my understanding, and I would welcome perhaps Natalie or Robert or somebody feeding back on this, but it's quite difficult, given the national planning presumptions are in terms of making the fullest use of possible sites. It's actually quite difficult to resist development on open land that has previously been developed. I think we'd struggle to argue that on appeal. Have I understood that right? I'd welcome a bit of guidance from planning officers on that one.
Okay, let's get Gideon's response first. Did you hear that, Gideon? Are you willing to? Are you working with the Rivers Trust on the initiative that they've proposed?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay. Right, Rob, are you able to, Natalie? What's the presumptions in favour of building on brownfield sites?
Councillor Stops. Yes, I think Rob has left the meeting, so it's John Sang who's supporting on this one. But yeah, so you're quite right, Councillor Snell. There's in terms of national and local policy, there's a kind of presumption in favour of development on previously developed land. So that's kind of a fundamental principle of planning that we apply in both plan making and decision making. I don't know if John wants to add anything. John Sang?
No, nothing further to add. Councillors are fully in line with what Natalie set out.
Okay, Brian. Questions?
No, I haven't got anything on this one.
Susan.
Thank Chair. I've got can Gerard Please talk me through, you know, this new condition on the addendum changing from the B class and E. Can you please talk me through that? I'm not totally clear about what that is doing in spite of the reason you gave. And the other thing that I want to ask, there was a planning permission granted at this site in 2015. That application, is it very similar to this one, if you can have a recollection? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, to answer the first point, this is a very similar condition to that which was proposed for Steve Fraser-Lim's item previously, because the government, as part of its changes to the planning system, is changing the use classes order, and what are currently A use classes, which is retail, professional financial services to visiting members of the public, restaurant, cafe, takeaway, and also B1, which is office, research and light industrial, which can be conducted in a residential area, are all being lumped into one great big use class, which is now going to be use class E, and that allows for all of those different types of uses, which means because they're all in the same use class, the change of use from one of those types of uses to another of those types of uses would not represent a material change of use, and therefore would not constitute development within the meaning of the Act. And so therefore, to ensure that this space is being retained as office or research or light industrial compatible with a residential area, we've recommended this condition so that it can only be used for those purposes and for no other purpose within the new extended use class E that is set to be introduced from the 1st of September.
So it can't be converted into a restaurant?
No. Now, you also refer to the so I need to refer back to my notes on the 2015 application. That application was actually withdrawn, Councillor. That was I was not the case officer who dealt with it, but I'm assuming that application would have been withdrawn on the basis of officer advice. I have no further information on that. I apologise, Councillor.
That's okay. In your report, there was a report that an application was granted on the 17th of December 2015. That was why I asked that question. On page 141.
Sorry, can you give me the paragraph number?
It's 3.11.
3.11.
Thanks.
No, I'm not seeing that in my copy of the report, Councillor.
Chair, that's for a different.
Hi, I can answer that. That application is actually for the neighbouring site. It's number 6. If you look on the report, just slightly above that, paragraph 3.10, there's number 6 Osmond Road. So it's just during the assessment somewhere, Gerard referenced 6 Osmond Road. So it's just to cross-reference that there's permission granted at the neighbouring site.
Thanks. Yeah, I can see the 6 on top. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Shona.
No problem.
Shona, sorry, not Sinead. Katie.
I had a couple, but they've already been asked by other members. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got a few then. In terms of the boilers on this site, why haven't we prescribed that they should be low emissions boilers? If we can, we should do that.
I believe that we have actually.
Okay. That's good. The parking space issue, is that relevant to us?
Not significantly, because that's a sort of landlord-tenant issue. Because the units, especially 2 to 4 canal side studios, have been let out on 999-year leases, and they include a parking space. But that is something which is for discussion between the landlord and the leaseholder.
So in planning terms, we don't care about that.
Not significantly.
Okay. Matt's questions reference the previous application that was rejected, but there was issues of daylight and overlooking and windows there that he's surprised haven't carried through to this one. Can you explain what the story is?
Yes, Chair. Now, I'm just going to go back to the presentation, if I may. Now, so this is the scheme. Can we see this?
Coming up. It's coming.
It's coming up. Sorry, technology. So this is the current scheme that is being proposed. Now, if we go back to the refused scheme, you can see that it is significantly larger. That's the view from Kingsland Basin, and that is canal side studios there. It also included balconies, and this element of the proposal here, the top 2 floors, would have been residential. And we considered that the potential for overlooking and having an overbearing impact of that scheme was far greater. This is again the Kingsland Bridge.
It was the second floor windows in the report previously that were referred to, specifically the first and second floor windows on the west elevation.
So we're looking at these windows here, effectively, the one that I have the pointer against. Well, if you look at if we quickly go back to the. Oops, sorry, I went slightly too far. Yes, there are windows there, but what they don't have is the central windows. And also, we have to remember that this is going to be a building that's in office use, and the character of the use of office buildings is different to the character of the use of residential buildings.
Those generally.
Okay, no, Matt, it's for us to ask questions. So in terms of those 2 issues, daylight and overlooking, you've thought about that and satisfied yourself?
I have, and I am. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Gideon suggested, this is to the agent, that an appraisal should be done not in the winter but in the summer as well, to get fully versed as to what the biodiversity issues were. Why are you not doing that? It sounds sensible.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously the appraisal was undertaken in the winter just prior to the application being submitted. It's the legal requirement that we do that. I spoke to the ecologist today, and they said that the results that they found very strongly suggest that there would be no, the results would not change significantly from a survey done in the summer. Obviously, we've had a fairly lengthy application process, and we've reached this point where your officers recommend approval, and that's what we'd like to do. So,
okay, Gerard, is there any grounds that we could ask them pre-commencement to do this survey at least?
Well, potentially.
Yes or no is the question I'm asking.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we might put a condition on that you do the survey in the summer pre-commencement. Matt, the materials, are we happy with those? Facing materials?
Yes, we are, Chair. We've got conditions for materials. It's going to be a high quality brick, precast concrete and dark grey aluminium windows, and we'll be seeing all the material samples for those.
Okay, and finally to Jim, the architect, from me. You've got a wonderful cross-laminated timber building just down the canal. It would make a good exemplar if this building was cross-laminated timber. Have you considered?
Potentially, but given our office is next door to that at number 8 Osmond Road, I saw how that went up, and it's not without its own issues.
Of
but
course,
we haven't looked in detail at how we would physically build this. So it certainly off-site fabrication and cross-laminated timber would be something that we would be looking at.
Okay, thank you. Right, any more questions, please? Peter.
Yeah, could I come back, please?
Yes, and Steve afterwards.
Thank you. Sorry, subject, further to that last answer I got, I've just been checking the conditions, and we do have a condition at 8.1.19 on biodiversity enhancement, saying we have to have an agreement for the provision of 50 metres of floating habitat. Now, the thing that's worrying me slightly about that is if the wildlife gardeners of Haggerston have not yet decided whether they will engage with this. I mean, it's not just the provision of it, it's the maintenance of it. So will the conditions be strong enough to say, well, if the wildlife gardeners of Haggerston don't take this on, that we will be able to enforce that condition against the management company of the building? Because I'm assuming that if it's a commercial building, it will have a management company running it. So I just
who runs this stuff? If it's put in the river, do the CRT run it by default? Gerard.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the CRT are responsible for the maintenance of Britain's canals and rivers, but I think I don't know if he's still here, but I think Gideon, if you could answer that question as well, please.
Gideon won't be here forever, will he? God bless him. You know what's going to happen. Who looks after the wildlife of the canal? It's the CRT, isn't it?
They are the statutory management organisation for the canal.
Okay.
Can I ask that condition puts the requirement on the managers of this building? Because I think CRT looks after all the waterways, and this needs far more specific and dedicated management. That's all that I would say.
Yes.
Can I just add,
How do we get this stuff to be in perpetuity managed properly?
can I just add that the condition does request a maintenance plan to be approved, so that would be in consultation with CRT, so that would secure who's going to maintain it in the long term.
And we hope the local organisation will contribute to that as well. Is that fair?
If they want to, if they're willing to.
Okay. Peter, does that answer your question? Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Am I on? Yeah. I think it was just a point around the massing in particular, and as a first point, looking at those kind of illustrations, the CGIs again, I'm just not totally convinced how that fits within the conservation area of the Kingsland kind of Regent's Canal. If you look behind, then you've got the low-rise, sort of on the other side of Osmond Road, you have the low-rise industrial buildings that are still there. This doesn't seem to be within keeping within the heritage area as it stands, and it may well be in keeping with the new buildings, but I'm not entirely convinced we should continue to make the same decisions based on previous kind of planning decisions that have also sort of negated the conservation area. And then I just thought, I don't really feel like we've heard enough from the residents of the Canalside Studios as to their amenity space and the impact on them. And so the amenity space was mentioned in the original statement. I'd just like to hear a bit more from them about what that will take away from them as residents.
So Matt, yours is the first question. The mass of that building, is it?
So in terms of the massing, we think it's in keeping with the immediate context.
Could you bring up these CGI again, Matt?
Gerard will be able to do that.
Gerard, sorry.
So it directly adjoins Canalside Studios, which is the 3-story building with a pitched roof. And the 4-story element of this proposed building is very slightly taller than the pitched roof of Canalside Studios. So it's, in sort of general context terms, it's in keeping with the, the scale of those buildings. So if you see on this, the parapet line of the proposed building, you can't see the actual pitched roof there, but you can see the pitch.
Yeah. Gerard, sorry, can you go along a couple of slides to the view from the basement there?
Yeah.
In particular.
And then obviously you've got, then it steps down to 3 stories. And then a little bit further on, you've got the 2-story historic range. And then you've got quite a wide separation gap there. So in terms of it sort of, there's a separation there, there's a breathing space between those historic buildings. So it doesn't sort of directly, so the lowest building there, the 2-story range, it doesn't directly adjoin that or sort of overwhelm it. There's quite a big gap there still. And then obviously you'll see the newer development, there's sort of newer developments, the sort of emerging context further along is for much taller buildings. So this sort of does step down. There is a stepping down there in scale.
But it's a step up within the step down, isn't it?
A very small step up. I think that sort of adds some interest and some definition. It's a very small sort of 4-story element, which, as I say, is as you can see in this image now, is very slightly taller than the pitch of the roof. So,
I have to say, I found these images to be slightly misaligned. To be honest, I mean, they're not very useful images, I have to say.
Matt, Steve, the fact of it being a conservation area doesn't mean that we're not intensifying or it's capable of intensification.
No, it's about an appropriate development that's in keeping with the character, and I think our overall assessment is that this development achieves that.
It doesn't look in keeping, does it?
Residents, sorry,
Sorry, Councillor Race, when you say that, in what sense it's not in keeping? I'm just. It's very taller than the pitch of the roof. So I mean, if you mean it's not it's not directly in line with that roof. No, it's not. I don't think that's harmful.
No, I mean that's not what I mean. I mean it doesn't look in keeping. It looks like a very new modern building, which is larger and has larger mass than the buildings around it. So it's both. We're kind of being sold that it kind of improves the industrial context of the canal which we're trying to protect, but I just don't understand how that is the case, judging from the designs that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, touched on the design and appearance, and there's this sort of reference to sort of industrial architecture in this sort of, there's quite big openings, very sort of strong horizontal and vertical. So yeah, it does come to the canal edge, which obviously historically buildings have on that site, and it's got a contemporary sort of industrial character, and we're going to push for very high quality materials. So we think it is in keeping with the character of the area.
I mean,
okay, you don't have to agree with the
No, I don't. Well, I don't agree. That's fine.
Steve, you can disagree with him, but you have to consider whether we'd be able to sustain anything. Would the professional officers be able to argue at appeal that this building is somehow takes from the conservation area to such a degree that overwhelms the benefits, clear benefits in term that you've heard about? So that's the decision. It's not necessarily, so it's a complicated decision, but it's yours to make. Your second question was about the amenity for residents. Who were you asking that of?
I think the residents, and then why the officers have judged it to be acceptable.
Because I don't think there was a resident from that development. So we haven't got a resident.
I was speaking on behalf.
Sorry, I think Matt was speaking on behalf of residents, wasn't he?
Firstly, apologies before for interjecting. I was just obviously keen to make sure that the issues were very clear, and the point we were making was obvious. I'm representing the residents, and I'm not a resident myself, so I probably won't speak as passionately in terms of how they use it. But clearly, the units themselves don't have their own private external space. This courtyard is their amenity space for all of the residents. This is where they meet and socialise and gather, particularly in recent times where we've all been struggling a bit, and that space is being cut in half. And not only is it cut in half, it is added there is the added issue of the new occupiers of the office space also spilling out into that space, and the further congestion created by the reduction in the vehicular space on the site as well. So I think it's as I say, it's a combination of the reduction in the size, and the reduction in movement of vehicles and increased pedestrian movement.
Would you like to ask the officers about the amenity of the residents and the strength of that in planning terms? Gerard.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As noted in the addendum report, this area is used as an informal amenity space for residents. There will be space in front of the two-storey range canal side studios. There will also be space to the east of the development that could be used as an amenity space for residents and occupiers. The building has been designed with the colonnades that the councillor referred to earlier, and it would, Councillor Snell referred to earlier, and access to the retained amenity area would be maintained. And if you look at the total amount of land that is being built on, it's significant. I think it is less than 50% of the open space at the site. So there would still be a not insignificant amount of open space that would be retained.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, so the proposal, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions, and we're going to put a pre-commencement condition on that there needs to be this assessment of the biodiversity in the summer. So perhaps your client needs to get on with that. That's okay, is it? Gerard, do you think we can justify that? Say that to me again.
Yes, we can justify that.
Thank you very much. So all those in favour, please show. Okay, I'll go through them, please, then. So Vincent's in favour. Katie?
In favour.
Susan?
In favour.
Brian?
In favour.
Peter?
In favour.
Steve?
Against.
Thank you. That is passed. Right, members, thank you very much, applicants and objectors. We've got another one. Do we want to do this? That's the, it looks to me as though it's a reasonably short one with an extant, effectively an extant permission. No, not an extant permission, but a very recent one.
Expired condition, yeah, permission, I mean.
So who's willing to stay here? Katie, Vincent, anybody else? Okay, so we've got.
As long as we've got 3 members, that's fine. Yeah.
We've got a quorum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Susan, are you staying?
We've only got this last one, isn't it?
Yes, and we think it's shortish. Anyway, there's enough of us, so I think is that okay, Natalie, with your officers? So I know you got some grief as well.
Yes, it's fine with officers to stay. If members are happy to stay, then we do proceed.
Okay.
Chair, sorry, apologies, Chair. Just want to know, is Councillor Bell leaving the meeting, just to clarify?
Bell is leaving the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so 41 Boundary, please, if we can have Claire Moore.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I'll just bring up my presentation. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, so the site is the house 41 Boundary Street, located in Shoreditch. So this red line marks out the site. It's located to the west of Boundary Street. This is just an aerial view of the subject site. So as you can see within the red line boundary, there is an existing 2-story residential building, contains 2 bedrooms. Just to talk you through the context a little bit. This building here is a 5-story residential building, which is 41 Boundary Street. This is Anlaby House, which is a 6-story residential building. To the west of the site is Ace Hotel here. And along the northern boundary here, this is Cleve Workshop. So these are grade 2 listed buildings. And further to the north is Cleve House, which is also a grade 2 listed building. And moreover, this boundary here signifies the boundary with South Shoreditch Conservation Area. And there's a boundary along here, along Boundary Street, with Tower Hamlet, which then also has the boundary estate further to the east. So the proposal is to demolish this building and construct a 2 to 4-story residential building with 3 bedrooms. The site will have access, as it currently does, through the ground floor of 41 Boundary Street. And as Chair, you've helpfully pointed out already, there is a permission that was granted in 2017. However, that did lapse on the 3rd of July. And so whilst that's not been implemented, there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment that may allow an extension of time for this as part of the government's COVID response. So this is just a view of the site from Boundary Street. So you can see here the 2-story parapet of the site with Cleve Workshops in the foreground, 41 Boundary Street here, and then Ace Hotel further to the west. And then this is just a closer view showing that same context. This is the view from Boundary Street with Anlaby House in the foreground, 41 Boundary Street. This here is the access that the site currently uses, and this is the servicing area. Then we have the side of Cleve Workshops and then Cleve House to the north. This is a view of the southern elevation of Cleve House. So as you can see, there are balconies and windows on this elevation facing the subject site, which would be down here. And this is a a view of the western elevation of 41 Boundary Street. So this is the residential building, the dual aspect, and these elevations are balconies and windows serving those flats. So this is the existing block plan. It's worthwhile to note that at the moment this is an undercross. This is a courtyard and then access to the building. And this is the proposed block plan showing the slade height going away from the sensitive residential building to the east. This is the ground floor plan. As you can see, they've incorporated the use of a courtyard within the internal design, making a greater use of the actual site. As we go up, you can see that there are windows on the northern elevation adjoining the courtyard. These windows here are obscure glaze, with this to confirm. This is the second floor plan. This is the mezzanine, and this is the proposed third floor plan. Also, just to note that with this terrace, there is a 1.8 metre high wall screening used to the north. This is the eastern elevation, so this is what would face 41 Boundary Street apartments. This is the western elevation, adjoining Ace Hotel. And this is the northern elevation, so this is what you would see against Cleve Workshop and from Cleve House. So just to explain, this blue line indicates the current building mass. The red line indicates what was granted permission in 2013 via extension. And then we have our current mass up against Liberty House to the rear. This is just a sketch the applicant has provided to show the proposed mass within the context. And then this is a 3D model of the proposed building within that site context. So the proposal has been brought forward to committee due to the responses we received. So we received 31 objections. And the main concerns that we received were regarding the heritage fabric and setting of Cleve Workshop and Cleve House, in addition to the conservation areas. We also received objections regarding the residential amenity of surrounding buildings, construction disturbance and congestion. And just with regards to the impact on heritage, we found in our report that the impact would be less than substantial, and then on balance, in accordance with the test under the MCCS, that the benefit, the public benefit of the proposal, that would be provision of a family-sized unit within such a central location, would outweigh that harm. Again, it's emphasised that there was permission granted for this scheme. However, whilst that has lapsed, we've assessed the scheme against the now adopted LP33, found the proposal to be acceptable against all relevant policies. And lastly, just in regards to the addendum, just to summarise that the changes made were regards to directly referencing South Shoreditch Conservation Area under 6.4 of the report. Otherwise, everything else in the report is as per written, and as such, we recommend that the application be granted subject to conditions and a 106 agreement regarding carbon contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jonathan, please. You've seen what we do. Over to you. Jonathan Mobley.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I quickly, I want to object to the fact that we're rushing this through at the end. I think this is a really important issue.
We're not rushing. We'll listen to everything.
Okay. Boundary estate is a really important piece of grade 2 listed architecture. It's not one building. It's not a set of workshops. It's the whole of the estate. And it's really, really important that the edges of the estate are preserved and respected. There was a planning application in 2014 on 14 Boundary Street itself, which was refused because of the impact on Cleve Workshops and the Boundary Estate, citing London Plan 7.4 and 7.8 heritage assets. Developments affecting heritage assets and their setting should conserve their significance, being sympathetic to their form, scale, materials and architectural detail. We would dispute that this application does any of that. There's other policy, Hackney Local Development Framework Core Strategy, CSP 24. All development should seek to enrich and enhance Hackney's built environment, identifying with and respecting the architectural, historic quality and the character of the surrounding environment. There's more of it. National Planning Policy Framework has been mentioned, which I'll come on to, the harm to the heritage asset and how that needs to be weighed against public benefit. Another planning application on Anlabi House, the building behind this proposed one, was refused in 2010 on pretty much the same grounds, the harm it would do to the context of the listed buildings and the Boundary Estate. We don't see that anything in this plan is any less harmful. There's a point about insufficient design detail, which was mentioned. We do not think, given the potential harm done, that there's enough detail in the submitted designs to actually explain what's really going to happen and what the actual resulting effect will be. I did write in about that. On the case officer's report, just to try and pick up a few points, the setting of the listed building has already been heavily impacted by adjacent developments, which appear overbearing. Well, actually, the settings of the Anlabi House and number 41, although they are large, they present blank walls. to the estate. And the existing house that's going to be replaced, you don't even see it. It is completely invisible. So the actual effect, although these buildings are large, is completely neutral. When you walk into the courtyard, your eye is drawn to the workshops. Your eye is not drawn to the blank walls above it. When this development is made, your eye will be completely drawn to this new, quite radical design, which is a small version of a grand design, a quite individualistic piece of architecture and completely out of keeping with the context. The planning's report also talks about how we're on the edge of the South Shore conservation area where things tend to change, but actually we're not. We're on the edge of the boundary estate. That's the correct context, and things are very uniform on the estate, and that's what we need to observe. We can't say, well, it's on the edge of the conservation area, therefore it's not so important, or therefore variation goes on. And I would also point out that Anlabi House is probably older than the workshops. It's always been there. It's not a new addition. So the current context is, apart from the mistake of the hotel on Shoreditch High Street, fairly well intact. The harm versus public benefit weighing up of the addition of a house against the substantial harm created to the context, we don't think this balances. What we're effectively getting is one additional bedroom on an existing house. The existing house is currently invisible and creates no harm at all. For the benefit of one additional bedroom, we think that this far outweighed by the harm being caused by this very individualistic design. Privacy. There's talks about privacy and how the workshops are not affected because they don't have windows facing the house. Well, actually, the workshops originally had skylights on the roof, and those are planned to be reinstated. There's a proposal to restore the workshops and to return them to original state with those glass roofs. So they will be affected by this development negatively. The privacy issue is also the fact that the report says the workshops face away from the building. Well, actually, the courtyard is used very much as an integrated part with the workshops. One of the photos I supplied shows the context of the workshops plus the yard.
Please.
Sorry? If
If you could wind up, your 5 minutes is.
Well, I think, I mean, in summary, the harm is any benefit is far outweighed by the harm done to this. We need better drawings to show what the hell is going on.
Thank you. Okay, could we have Sarah, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening. I'd just like to give a little bit of background on what we see as a renewal application of a previously approved scheme expiring this month, followed by a brief description of the design proposal. So back in 2014, our clients bought a 2-storey bedroom house with permission in place to extend it to 4 stories with 3 bedrooms, granted in June 2013. This permission suited our client's need, who wanted to live in a house big enough to raise a family. The existing house on the site is too small, suffers from poor build, with minimal insulation in the external envelope, and the quality of accommodation is not high, with only single aspect rooms. The 2013 permission to extend it by 2 stories is also poorly designed, with an awkward layout that wasted space and again provided single aspect rooms and an unsympathetic blank full-story wall adjacent to the boundary with Cleve Workshops. Our client appointed us to develop an alternative scheme to provide better quality family accommodation and a more sustainable and energy efficient building over a prolonged time period. This is the scheme we're looking at today. It is the exact same scheme we gained approval for in 2017. One of the main features of our scheme is the introduction of a courtyard around which the house is composed. This brings several benefits. 1, it breaks up the mass of the building. 2, it reduces the impact of a blank 4-storey wall to Cleve Workshops, and in part there is actually no building at all against the Cleve Workshop boundary wall where the courtyard is. 3, it also brings light and privacy to the house, providing triple aspects and rooms with an attractive outlook onto the courtyard, not onto neighbours. And lastly, it also means no windows are required to face the flats at 41 or to Cleve Workshops and the mansion block to the north beyond, and so it protects their privacy. As we heard, there are existing very high buildings all around the site, between 5 and 7 stories, and they already dominate the 1-story Cleve workshop. What our scheme does is to step the height of the new house from north to south, so that to help mediate the significant height changes between Cleve and existing 6 and 7-story buildings, and knit them together to give greater integration. This means the house is at its lowest on the Cleve workshop boundary and the boundary to the flats at 41. It then rises furthest away from both of these, against the 6 and 7-story buildings to the south and west, hence reducing its impact on the workshops. So effectively, the form and aesthetic of the house design is a direct response to its context. It's not trying to be striking and different, as the objector suggests. It's trying to be respectful and contextual to its neighbouring properties. With regards to its aesthetic and material treatment, it is worth noting that the new house is on a backland site, and together with its inward-looking design is only partially and momentarily seen from the street. It is surrounded by a mix of building styles of no particular merit or vernacular trends other than the listed buildings. So our material palette takes its cue from the slate-tiled pitch roofs of the listed workshops and buildings in the boundary estate, and clads the majority of all walls and roofs in this simple grey tile. With respect to the objections raised, I understand that, with all due respect, they may have misunderstood and thought that the proposals we've submitted are different to the previously approved 2017 scheme, but this isn't the case, and I do want to reiterate that what you are looking at today is the exact same scheme approved in 2017, and we're not trying to renew it or change it. Oh, we're just trying to renew it, not change it. That said, we think that the scheme we've brought forward is a much better scheme than the previous 2014 4-story scheme, and is a significant improvement to the existing poor quality 2-bed house on the site. We think our scheme has given careful consideration to the issues raised by objectors, and to surmise, that is, 1, the heritage context. Here, the scale of the new replacement dwelling is modest in comparison with the scale of surrounding buildings, and the stepped approach helps mediate the shift in scale between Cleve workshops and the higher buildings around it. Secondly, the neighbours' amenity. There is no loss of privacy due to no windows facing neighbours, as they will all look inward to the courtyard, and the balcony has a 1.8 metre high parapet wall around it. Adequate light is maintained to neighbours due to the house form, which is lower where lowest to neighbours' windows, and there is an accompanying daylight analysis that demonstrates this. Over development, there is only 1 new bedroom, which will have little impact on increased noise, which I think again was an objector's concern, and it will make this a much needed 3-bedroom house better suited to families. There will be minimal disturbance and disruption during construction, and we're happy to provide a demolition and construction management plan as a condition. So to conclude, we started this renewal process back in early March in order to renew the application in good time before it expired in July. We understand that during this process, the new LP 33 has come into play, and this should be taken into consideration for this renewal application. There appears to be no policy changes since 2017 that suggest this scheme should not be approved again. If anything, the key policies we believe we address are in some cases more robust, which further supports the ethos of this scheme. Namely, it will be more energy efficient than the poorer quality house it replaces, and it will be able to employ more sustainable forms of construction and material, which would be difficult to retrofit within the existing house. And secondly, and finally, it fulfills the sustained need for better quality family housing, which is seen as a public benefit. So in this context, we see no reason why this renewal scheme should not be considered for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I just first ask Natalie just to confirm the issues of the extant or not extant or whatever that we have to give weight to on this development? Because members haven't seen this, have they? It's an officer decision.
Thank you, Chair. That's right, Jess. So the previous application was determined under delegated powers. As the case officer said in her presentation, although we have the new local plan in place now, LP 33, there is a permission that has only just expired, and that needs to be taken into consideration this application. So although the policies themselves have changed, the kind of objectives of the policy and the kind of design considerations haven't materially changed since we made the last decision under delegated powers. So that does need to be considered as part of members' considerations here.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions. One is the design detail was mentioned. The objector said you couldn't see much. Do we know what we're actually getting as part of this development? Is there enough detail for us to make a decision on this? Claire?
Yes, so just to provide context, there were objections that requested CGI of the development. However, at the time of assessing this application, we were dealing with an extant planning commission. It was only that when we had to refer it to committee, that then the commission that was marked was extant, then expired. So we felt that it wasn't reasonable to request that additional information that wasn't requested under a previous commission. But we believe that we do have sufficient information to
the drawings
the
are
impact of this proposal.
Okay. The drawings are good.
That's sufficient, yes.
Okay. The slate roof, we're going to control for, is Matt here? It's going to have a slate roof, is it, Matt?
Sorry, Adam will be speaking.
Sorry, Adam.
Yes, it's a slate roof. We've conditioned it. I think it's a fake slate. It's a kind of a cement-based one, but it's a Rivendell product, so it's a really, really good product and actually mimics slate really, really, really well. And in this contact, it was considered acceptable in 2017, and it's still considered acceptable now, but we have conditioned it to get a sample.
So I've been down there, and I think that's important. Although there are no slate roofs left, it's it would be good to start a.
Yeah.
Can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with you. Yes, it would be good, and I think it will match what Cleve Workshops is. So Cleve Workshops will have a slate roof imminently, and this will match it as well.
Okay, good. Any questions, members? Katie.
The opaque glazing, is that conditioned? It was mentioned, but I can only find one instance of the word opaque. Sorry?
I'm looking at. Oh dear.
I had a reference to opaque glazing, but maybe
I'm looking at Adam, and he's trying to speak. So Claire, could you give us the answer to that? Opaque.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've not specifically conditioned it. There's no reason why we couldn't. But in terms of conditioning, we've got a condition which says in accordance with the plans. The plans clearly say opaque glazing, so that should be sufficient.
That's fine by me, Chair. Thank you.
Any more? Going once. Peter, you in the room? Any questions? Go on.
A comment, really. I think this is an incredibly important historical site, but I do note, now I don't want to seem we're not listening to the residents, but I do note that none of the people I'd expect normally to object, like the Conservation Area Advisory Committee, like the Hackney Society, seem to be, they seem to be quite happy with it, which reassures me that it does support, as the applicant said, the surrounding very important heritage buildings.
Thank you. Okay, there are no more questions.
Chair.
Are there, Susan?
No, thanks. It is not directly a question, just to pick on what the applicant representative said around the two previous development that have been demolished and rebuilt because of poor design and quality. Are you going to guarantee that this will not be demolished again for poor quality? It's a bit strange that two previous scheme have been demolished according to you because of poorly designed building.
Sarah.
Sorry, there haven't been any buildings demolished as far as I'm aware as of yet. We are suggesting, we do believe that the existing building, which is poorly designed and has very poor quality spaces inside and lacks insulation where you would need it to make it more energy efficient. The 2013 scheme was never implemented. That would also, that also we felt was a poor design in terms of the quality of space and its impact on the adjoining workshops. Does that answer the question? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Do you want to ask the objector that same question? He's dying to come in and be told we would listen.
Please comment, Jonathan.
Can't hear you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I didn't mention demolition. What I was referring to was 2 planning applications, one on Anne Larby House and one on 41 Boundary in 2014 and 2010 that were refused on the grounds of the harm they would cause to the heritage context.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I was referring to 2 planning applications, no demolition. So 2 planning applications that were refused in 2010 and 2014 on the adjoining buildings. They were refused on the grounds of the harm they would cause to the heritage context. And in our view, the same harm is caused by this scheme.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I would say about, I don't know how you're going to build that building, given you've got to go over the top. You might advise your client he should look at cross-laminated timber if we approve this, because it would make a good quality building. So the proposed recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Keep your hands there. Katie?
In favour.
Vincent's in favour. Susan?
In favour.
Brian's not here. Peter?
In favour.
And Steve?
In favour.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for sticking with it this evening. Well done, officers. Interesting discussions, as always. See you hopefully in the real world. When can we get back to the
Chair, as always, we still have 1 item left.
Oh yes, please note the delegated decisions.
Noted.
Noted.
Why can't
Thank
we
you very much.
Noted.
No.
Sorry, Vincent, what was that?
Why can't we go back to the town hall?
It's against the rules.
Spread ourselves.
Because the town hall is not yet open.
Sorry, Chair, can I just confirm that we formally finished agenda business then?
Yes.
Thank
All
you very much.
I'm
I just wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go and have a gin and tonic, I think. Bye-bye.
Enjoy. Goodbye.
I will.
Night, everyone.
Sorry if I